Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is my show, or we can say our show, because I can't necessarily have a show without you. And I'm glad, regardless of where you are in the world, that you've decided to show up and join me here as we go through news, politics, and all of these things that address us on a daily basis. Now, man, I hope you guys are doing good. It is Monday. It is early in the morning. I am up. In fact, I was up at like 4 a.m., so I am wide awake at this point. And we have a damn good show for you today. Mark Sloboda is going to be here hitting several topics first thing this morning. Later on, we're going to have Kit Clarenberg. I had Kit on the show in a while, so it'd be great to catch up with him. He's written an article that I think is a damn good article. And I think it's a damn good article because it's one of those stories that hasn't necessarily been told, but should be. And I'm not going to preempt him. I'm going to let him bring that on. And we're also going to have the man himself. He's probably going to have a stogie with him. And that is going to be Michael Maloof. Maloof has been in the defense industry for like 30 years. And Elon Musk made a comment. And I thought to myself, okay, it's creepy that Musk is looking into it. By the same token, it should be looked into. It's kind of, it's like there's no way out of that box. Somebody other than him should be looking at it, yes. By the same token, there's something to be said that we have deep problems with the way that we do defense. And I would argue, and I've asked this question on more than one occasion. How do we know that we are getting bang for the buck? I hope you understand my question. Meaning, we invest billions into the military. And investing billions into the military, I'm sorry, not billions, what the number is, like $1 trillion a year, give or take. How do we know that the money that we're investing in that trillion is indeed coming back in regards return on investment? How do we know? And I guess my thing was always, we don't. Not just we don't. When anybody brings up this notion of an audit, it gets poo-pooed away saying, well, we can't audit the defense industry. Okay, well, if we can't audit it, then how do we know that the money that we're spending on it is worth the money that we're spending on it? It's that part. So when Elon made the point of saying we're going to lose the next war, my thing was, hey, Elon may have a point, even though I don't want Elon to be the person to be the determining factor on how we do our defense. There's that. So yeah, damn good show for you today. I want to start off with Pelosi. I would say that Democrats are in a bit of disarray. And the reason why I say they're in a bit of disarray is because they're in a bit of disarray. They don't seem to know how to deal with the new Donald Trump. A Trump that's more confident, that's more secure, and not just more confident and more secure, but beat them where it counts, in the ballot box, not just getting the vote tally enough to get over the finish line, but actually winning outright in the election. And they don't seem to know what to do with that. They get a population that says was like 30% approve of the Democratic Party. They get Trump with the polling that doesn't look necessarily horrible, even after all of the Bigfoot moves that he has been doing since getting into that office. They don't seem to know how to deal with that. All right, clearly something needs to change. They just don't know what that something is. And one caveat, they don't know what that something is in the context of maintaining the system as it currently operates. There's a difference in those things. What I mean by that is, it's like saying, I want to maintain my same living situation. However, other things are not intact for me to maintain that living situation. And yet I want to maintain the living situation. Meaning they know that something is wrong, but they don't necessarily want to change anything real in order to deal with the things that are wrong. And therein lies the rub with the current Democratic Party. And not just the current Democratic Party, what they are going to do in order to deal with addressing Trump and addressing him going forward. So Pelosi dragged on to CNN. She may not necessarily be Speaker of the House, but she is still Mama Bear in regards to the way people see the political space. And Pelosi, astonishingly, said this. And I'm going to play this out a little bit just so you can hear the lead up to what Pelosi is saying here.
Tonight, Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi says that Democrats have a plan to counter President Trump's aggressive political agenda, as her party has been zeroing in on Elon Musk, holding rallies at the very agencies that he has been working to purge. Now, almost 3 weeks into the second Trump presidency, the former House Speaker says change is coming.
We're very proud of Hakeem Jeffries, our leader. He has given us guidance on our priorities, what we're here to fight for, but also how we counter the Trump administration with litigation in the courts, legislation on the floor of the House, as well as communication and mobilization at the grassroots level. In about 6 or 7 months, you're going to see such a change. By the time we start our campaigns in this fall, for next fall, you're going to see a very different picture about the Democrats vis-a-vis Donald Trump.
Not everyone.
What does that even mean? What does that even mean? 6 or 7 months? 6 or 7 months? So Pelosi is effectively saying, just hold on, guys. In 6 or 7 months, the Democratic Party is going to make adjustments. And you're going to see those adjustments in 6 or 7 months. You know, the thing that she didn't say in this, grand strategy. Grand strategy. Lawsuits are tactics. Yeah, you could say it's a strategy in the sense that this is something that you plan to do over and over and over again. Okay, fair enough. But let's be clear. A lawsuit is somewhat of a tactic. What I don't hear is we plan to set an agenda. And that agenda is going to focus on XYZ in order to bring people back to the party. That's what I don't hear. That's what she did not say. And that is the thing that is probably more important than the other stuff. Meaning, what is underlying what you are effectively trying to tell the American public to say, hey, we are actually a viable party. We're a viable vehicle for you to come back to, for you to be involved in, for you to kind of push in order to do social change. We are a viable party to do that. I'm pointing out that without grand strategy in the context of this is what we represent, this is what we stand for, this is what we're pushing for, this other stuff is secondary. Now, you may hope that Trump falls flat. And if he falls flat, that you can kind of pick up the pieces and run with the fact that he fell flat. But that is more so waiting for your opponent to screw up, which he may do. Because again, we're, after all, talking about Donald Trump. But that is not the most, that doesn't instill me with confidence. That doesn't give me this feeling like, ooh, they get the fact that they have screwed up somewhere along the way. That is not what I get out of this. That is not what I get out of this. So one of the other things that came up, Pod Save America. So Pod Save America was asked this. And listen to what he's saying here. His argument is effectively where Democrats are trying to sort themselves out. And as Democrats sort themselves out, we still need people to continue to support and vote for the Democratic Party as it sorts itself out. What? What? You want people to back and vote for you, to push for you, to try to get you in office when you don't even know what you are. I hope you understand what I mean, right? Like one of the main things in the questions that continuously came up, what do you represent? What do you stand for? What does it mean to be a Democrat? And over again, they did not necessarily have the best of answer for that. And in not having a good answer for it, you can imagine people looking at this and saying, okay, well, why am I voting for something if you can't even tell me what you are? His thing is, well, we still need people to vote for us. And between Trump and Democrats, it's easy. If it was that easy, Kamala Harris will be president of the United States. This is right here. I'm not going to play the entirety of the clip. I'm just going to play a part of it in order to make the point. But I think they're missing the boat.
Pod Save America, the direction that I'm seeing is vote for Democrats. Mm-hmm. You even have a political action wing that is a part as a way to fund candidates. But I found something, and this is just from me traveling the country and performing for a wide variety of different audiences in different states. Yeah. The general public as a whole doesn't trust politicians as a whole.
100%.
On either side, because they don't think that they represent them.
And less so than at any time in recent history.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with them. They feel like they represent their donors. So how is voting even harder for Democrats the answer to their concern?
It's not. It's part of what we want to do, and what we've been trying to do, as well as just vote for Democrats, is having a conversation, being a place for a conversation and a debate about the future of the Democratic Party and what kind of Democratic candidates we want to elect, and focusing on primaries and what kind of party we want to be, what we want to stand for. And I think there's a healthy debate to be had. There's also a lot of emotion around that, especially now. But I think that's critical, because I don't think, now, the reason we still say go vote Democrats is because when it's, at the end of the day, when it's Democrats versus Donald Trump and his brand of Republicans, then it's a pretty easy choice, even if the Democrats aren't perfect or you don't like them that much. But ideally, we want to build a party that people want to be part of.
Dude, I think you're missing the boat. And I don't say this brutally. I say it honestly. I think you're missing the boat. You're making this argument that people should vote for Democrats, even when Democrats don't know what they stand for, don't know what they represent, and for that part, the public don't know what they stand for and don't know what they represent. And you still make this argument, well, we believe people should vote for Democrats anyway. Why? I understand why you think that, because you're a Democrat. But what about everybody else? I find that clip to be astonishing, just like I find the last clip to be rather astonishing. You are a political party in the United States, one of the major political parties, and you have no clue what you represent in real terms. And despite having no clue in what you represent in real terms, you are still making a pitch for people to vote for you. That is astonishing. What are they voting for? No clue. No clue. But we still want people to vote for us. We still want you to go out and support and send us money because, Kamala Harris is $20 million in debt. That is outrageous. That is outrageous. Now, I know that he's sitting here with his legs crossed thinking that what he just said makes perfect sense. I'm pointing out that is absurd. It's an absurd premise. Vote for me, even though you don't necessarily know what you're voting for. Okay, fair enough. If people do that, how do they ever affect their political agenda? Say for the moment that people are voting not for the sake of voting. Say people are voting because they want to actually get something accomplished. People like me. How can I get something accomplished if you don't even know what you're trying to get accomplished? And why should I give you any level of support if indeed you don't know what you want to get accomplished? How do I know that what you get accomplished or what you want to get accomplished falls in line with what I want to get accomplished? There is no way for me to know that if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what you represent, if you don't know what you're pushing for in the political space. This is absurdity. Whether it's coming out of Pelosi saying, give us 7 months in order to figure out who we are and what we represent, or this guy saying, we don't know what we are. And despite the fact that we don't necessarily know what we are, we still want your support. Outrageous. Outrageous. Completely and entirely outrageous. There's a saying that the right wins when the left loses. And what's meant by that is that for all intents and purposes, if you are fighting on the side of the left and you're doing this kind of legitimate push for workers' rights, workers' protection, those type of things, you're dealing with the overwhelming majority of the American public and have a much better chance of getting those people on your side, as opposed to, let's say, a 1% from the right. I think that's true in the US. I even think that's true in Europe. But I want to go to my guess. Just outrageous, just astonishing. Thank you by these guys. Let me go to my guess. We are joined with the one, the only Mark Sloboda. Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. My man, how you doing, Mark? You doing okay this morning or today for you?
Jamaro, I'm alive. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
I'm alive. It is early, but I am here nonetheless. I had to bring you on to have a conversation about what Trump is saying, at the very least to the New York Post, is that he's been in conversations with Putin about Ukraine. And what I'm hearing about these conversations, they're talking about meeting at one point, but on top of meeting, there seems to be this kind of carrot and stick approach that Trump seems to be going with behind the scenes of maximal sanctions if you don't fall in line. But if you do fall in line, we'll allow the sanctions to go away. We'll allow the Nord Stream to come back on. We'll allow ponies and unicorns and rainbows to fly out of the sky and grace the Russian soil. Basically, they're offering all of these promises as a carrot and infinite sanctions as a stick, even against countries like China and India that work with Russia, or for that matter, the BRICS countries. What is going on here? Russia's being kind of sheepish about this. They don't want to call Trump a liar, so they don't necessarily come out and say, well, no, these conversations haven't taken place. By the same token, they haven't necessarily said that they have either. They're being somewhat, squirrely with it. Peskov comes out and says there are back channel communications or communications that are taking place on multiple levels. But Trump is being very specific, saying he spoke with Putin. What is going on here? What's the conversation that's taking place in real terms?
Okay, so first of all, the statement that Trump has said definitively that he has spoken from Putin, we have not actually heard from Trump. This was from a very sparsely and poorly written blurb of an article in the New York Post. Not exactly something that I would consider a paper of record. Now, obviously, Donald Trump feels more comfortable with the New York Post, and it does seem that they had an exclusive interview with him on Air Force One. By the content of that article, that conversation must have lasted less than 5 minutes. Because there is not very little substance there. And we don't actually have a quote from Trump. We have the New York Times, the New York Post author saying that Trump said he spoke to Putin. What we actually have Trump recorded as saying is, if I'm speaking to him, I'm not going to say. So, meanwhile, the Russian side continues to say as you said, they're not outright saying Trump is a liar. We haven't spoken in those words, but we had a Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov reiterate again today that there has been no contacts at the highest level, and there is no contacts at the highest level scheduled between Russia and the United States, which leaves us in a he said, she said. Do you want to believe Trump, or do you want to believe the Russian government? Whether contacts have taken place. The Russian statements, to my mind, seem to indicate that some contacts have been restored at the lower level, right? At the embassy level, right? Maybe at the intelligence services level, they are talking to each other. But the Russian side is giving no indication, no firm. In fact, they're giving fairly firm indications that there has been no conversations between Trump and Putin, right? As firm as we can get without the Russian presidential spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, spoke over the weekend, and he basically said, if such conversations are happening, I don't know anything about it. And he was being pretty blunt. I mean, the way he said it was fairly sincere and convincing. And
right.
What gave the impression that he did not believe that they were happening, right? So maybe there's some secret phone conversations going on between Trump and Putin that the Russian presidential spokesman, that the top ranks of Russia's diplomats are not aware of. Or it could be Trump talking out of his butt again, exaggerating things and being purposefully vague in a way that is, well, not very Trump, I have to say.
Yeah.
Trump
Yeah.
usually, comes right out and saying it. And when he's saying, I'm not going to say, and I'm not going to say how many times we've spoken, and I better not say, and these other things. Now, it would be one thing if they had spoken before the inauguration and there had been an agreement to not disclose that for political reasons in the US. It would be a further understanding if they had spoken after the inauguration, but Trump didn't want it publicly taking center stage in the United States in the press while he was still trying to get his own secretaries and appointments through the Senate, right? Through the appointment process. And if it was the United States firmly, not talking about it, not denying it, but this is not the situation. This is Trump being coy and suggesting that they have spoken, the exact opposite of that situation, while the Russians are like, oh, what? No, not really. But we're ready to talk if you want to. So that leaves us with two possibilities. One, they are secretly having conversations. They agreed to keep it quiet. And then Trump immediately went out and blabbed to the press about it. And the Russians are like, wait a minute, didn't we just agree not to talk about this? Right? That's one possibility. The other possibility is Trump is talking out of his butt.
Yeah.
And Occam's razor being what it is, both are, shall we say, theoretically possible, right? Either one could be true, but I tend to believe the latter, that this is just Trump bloviating without any real substance more than the former. This is all I have, what evidence I have to go on, right? I know there is a lot of wild stuff going on out there right now. There are a lot of people on social media saying a lot of things that, as far as I'm concerned, some of them I saw a video of a deep fake video of Trump speaking just today. Claiming, having Trump say things like, "I'll make part of Russia. I'll have parts of Russia included in the Ukrainian constitution," and that sorts of things, right? And then also saying words like "bullshit" out loud to a room full of press. And Trump does a lot of things, but openly swearing to a room full of press is not one of them. So obviously this was disinformation. It is a deep fake video. It's fairly convincing if you don't, aren't paying attention. And I know that some Russian channels are promoting that around as if it happened. That threat, as far as I know, has not happened. I believe that is a not real. We have other people claiming that they have sources that I have not been able to confirm anywhere else, right? Ideas of total economic war and being threatened, with this carrot and stick approach. That is possible. But if so, I can't find anyone who's talking about it.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So here's what we do know. That scenario is plausible. It is very plausible because that is all that we have heard, right, on the subject so far. We have had multiple times Trump suggest that more sanctions, meaning he, could level more sanctions about Russia. Mm-hmm. We have had Trump's envoy, Kellogg, former General Kellogg, outright say that he ranks current U.S. sanctions against Russia as only at a 3 out of 10, and that there's lots of room to ramp them up. Okay. I mean, I don't actually believe that's true in the slightest, but that is what he has said, obviously making the suggestion that they are preparing or they are considering launching more sanctions against Russia, right? And we have had reports in the press that both Kellogg and Waltz, Trump's national security advisor, in internal debates, this has been reported in the Western press, in internal debates are in favor of a escalate to de-escalate situation with Russia. meaning sanctions and providing more weapons to the Kiev regime. That's what we know for certain thus far. Thus, some of the things that we have heard unconfirmed by some people, and I don't want to name names or anything like that, are entirely plausible, but we don't know. We don't know that they've actually spoken yet. We have no confirmation of anything. We know that the flow of arms is continuing. We know that it has not been interrupted, as has previously been suggested and reported by some people. Whatever is happening to U.S. aid, right? That's another story. That is, financing for NGOs and medias and that sort of thing. And that obviously is having an effect, but it's not actually being done specifically against Ukraine, although that's certainly to the benefit here, right? The so-called independent U.S. funded propaganda out in the world, in Ukraine, in Russia, but also in Georgia, and against China and against Iran, all over the world, is suddenly without a paycheck and folding. I've seen numbers, 6,200 journalists and 700 some media outlets, right, are suddenly media outlets, propaganda, U.S. government propaganda, unfunded around the world. And there has been the suggestion by people close to the Trump administration that this could be extended to Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty as well. Now, it's not because Trump is against what U.S. aid has done in terms of influence, all right, of we want to call it sharp power, of psychological info warfare operations against, well, to be fair, not only other countries, but their own people as well, because they hear the propaganda just as much, right? Because Trump has previously, in his previous administration, used them, right? I mean, he fully engaged U.S. aid in his very ham-fisted attempt to overthrow the Venezuelan government during his last administration, and it was openly reported in the Western press that he has begun a covert influence war against China, right? Again, U.S. aid, not the only, right? And it has to be said, just because U.S. aid is defunded, at least suspended, right, for the time being, the National NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, is not touched, right? It may be also interrupted as part of Mark Rubio's stop work order, but there hasn't obviously been the mass purging of it like there has been U.S. aid. Trump is focusing on U.S. aid in particular because he has identified it as, in his mind, a viper's nest of his domestic political opponents. Samantha Powers being one of those raving lunatics that he is talking about. And on that one, I would probably actually agree with Trump on, right? And a lot of other people in USA. But it is not because they are acting as regime change, tools of the United States, or it's not because they're running pro-U.S. propaganda networks. It's because they are critics and opponents of Donald Trump, and he's rooting out that rat's nest. And Maria Zakharova, the Russian foreign ministry spokesman, was quite clear about that today, saying, yes, it appears that Trump is purging out these foreign propaganda at its behest and its own internal bureaucracy to that effect, but only so that he can reformat it and direct it to his own purposes. Let's be clear about this. Do not think that Trump suddenly says that, U.S. having InfoWar, PSYOP, however you want to term it, regime change efforts in other countries is bad. That's not what he is saying. That is not what is happening. He's going after his domestic political opponents. They just happens to be a lot of them in U.S. aid and a few other places within the government right now. This is part of his war, as he identifies it, as Steve Bannon identifies it, against the deep state, right? But just don't fall into the projectionist trap that thinking that whatever Trump will replace that with is good or better. It will just
they
be
kept
a
it.
different flavor of empire.
From my understanding, they put it under Rubio. And Rubio kind of made this point, like
one of the top neocons in the entire United States, like the young playboy of neocons.
Let me ask you this. Say for the moment, though, that the reporting is correct, that a carrot and stick is being offered on some level.
Entirely plausible. Entirely.
And what I mean by that is for all intents and purposes, the position that Donald Trump is taking on it, that he wants to freeze the conflict and everything else, that with reporting on it.
Yeah.
With sanctions, these kind of radical sanctions, I mean, does Russia just consider this a bluff? Do they, from their point of view, believe, okay, well, the most of these sanctions have already been issued? And for that matter, does Russia just disbelieve the promises that are coming out of America in regards to what they'll do in order to get a deal? Like, I don't know if there's been reporting internally in Moscow about the thinking behind the scenes. That's what I'm asking you about it. What's the thinking so far in Moscow?
Okay, so, I mean, the thinking in the Kremlin is quite obviously they're not afraid of U.S. sanctions. They've already weathered over 24,000 sanctions against Russia, right? In the last decade, 24,000, right? They're not afraid of any more. There is very little direct exposure between the U.S. and the Russian economy. What there is, like say on uranium, that's what the United States buys from Russia in significant quantities, is simply because the U.S. needs it, right? That's the situation. They're not afraid. They're not going to be threatened, right? What if there was going to be, as you propose, as some people have reported, an all-out economic war on Russia? Let's be clear about what that is. That would be a war declared against the rest of the world, against all of the companies and countries that currently trade with Russia out there, to stop trading with Russia entirely, or face the wrath, or actively be sanctioned by the United States itself. And we're talking about extremely geopolitically crux and important countries like India, like Turkey, like the United Arab Emirates, like China. Indonesia, China. I mean, well, China is okay. We can already put that into the adversarial to the U.S. position, right? That is at least it sanctioning China in any way is problematic because China is so huge and their economy is so huge. In a similar way, Russia is problematic in that regard, in particular because it's the largest commodity supplier, right? The commodities that every country needs and that have become already a vital component part of the global economy, such as the threat of trying to force every other country in the world to stop using them would have such a disruptive effect on the market. You think you know what inflation is? Forget the rest of the world, which would be, just as, if not more infected. But let's simply talk to the American people. Do you think you know what inflation is? No. You don't know what inflation would be if there was an attempt to try to force every country in the world to stop buying grain from Russia, the largest exporter of grain to the world, to stop buying Russian oil and gas, the biggest energy exporter to the world, metals, right? Chemicals, all of these other things that Russia provides to the global economy. They do exist in other parts of the world, but they do not exist if in the quantities required to satisfy all of the world's demands, right? That's already, Russia's supply is already well included within the market, the market margins. We're talking up to 35%, right? You try to take that out of any market and the prices will immediately go sky high, right? And India's not going to like it. India just signed a 10-year long-term oil supply agreement with Russia, right? Big one, right? China continues to cement further oil and gas deals as well. And, some of the large portions of the most at-risk portions of the world for food insecurity, including Africa, depend on Russian grain. Try to sanction Russian, economy in its entirety. You can only do that by tanking the entire world's economy and thus gaining the diplomatic ire of the entire rest of the world on two accounts. One, because they don't like being told by the US who they can or cannot trade with. That would be sacrificing their sovereignty, their economic and political sovereignty to the United States. But also you would be immiserating their own people in the process because of the inflation and the lack of resources that would result. So if that is a threat that is on the table, right? Russia can be like, you want to take the whole world down in an attempt to take us down? All right, let's play. We're willing to risk that. Whether it's a bluff or not, we'll see how long you last versus how long we last in that regard.
Interesting.
Russia is a continental size economy, right? Most of what Russia vitally needs, right? Food, energy, metals, everything Russia produces of its own. In the last decade, it's with the help of Western sanctions, a lot of its domestic industries that withered after the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union, textile production, automobile production, right? These other, they have all recovered, right? Because there was a lack of Western supply of these things, right? So the demand increased, part of it was met by other countries, but the greatest part of it was filled by Russian domestic producers, which means you've seen a boom in the Russian agricultural industry, a boom in the Russian manufacturing industry, a boom across the board in these things. Russia is fairly economically self-sufficient. Are they going to be able to get imported Parmesan in those situations? No, right? Prosciutto. No, I mean, there's certain things, although to be perfectly honest, Russia does now make its own Parmesan.
Do they?
I wouldn't rate it, with Michelin stars, but if I'm grading it to put on my spaghetti, it works just fine. I hate to tell you.
That's too
if
funny.
you're not, ridiculously pretentious in those regards. Russia's not afraid. The Russian economy in the last 3 years has weathered everything that the entirety of the West has thrown at it, and in many ways only grown stronger. Look at Russia's growth numbers again. Yes, they have moderately high inflation, but a part of that is only because Russia's own average salaries are increasing so much. There's so much of a direct investment boom. Previously, a lot of Russian wealthy people, right, were taking their money that they made in Russia and investing it in other parts of the world, right? Now they can't do that because it's not safe for them, right? So they're reinvesting everything they make into the Russian economy, and they're reaping dividends and safety by doing it. And there is a lot of countries out there whose wealthy people, right, India, China, but also Saudi Arabia, Turkey, others, they have seen a market open up where the West has completely pulled itself out of, and they're investing and taking over niche parts of the Russian market. So Russia's not afraid of Western threats. It's really not. And if they want to try to take on the entire world to force them to stop trading with Russia, Russia's ready to go there. I mean, Trump, by threatening the ethnic cleansing of Palestine openly, right? Talking about creating a French Riviera once we get all the pesky people who live there out of the situation. He has just inflamed the entire Islamic world against the United States to a degree that, frankly, I don't believe that he can understand. I don't think that he is capable of understanding that. He's just outside of his little reality bubble.
Step into that for me for the moment, because you're right. I mean, for one, I guess to start it off, this notion, Democrats are now trying to act as if this was all Trump. Oh, this is Trump's idea. This is Trump's idea.
This was Biden's idea before it was Trump's.
Exactly. Right here.
Blinken went to both Egypt and Jordan in the last 2 years and asked them to open their borders so that Israel could drive the people of Gaza out of Gaza. And, because that's the only way. If you have, this is classic counterinsurgency warfare, right? It's very much the same thing to a degree that the U.S. faced in Vietnam. Right? Your opponent that you're fighting is using asymmetric warfare tactics. They are embedded within a civilian population that by and large supports them. The only way to remove them completely, right, to defeat them, to destroy them, is to remove the population. You have to drain the reservoir from out of which they operate. Now, I'm talking in extremely inhumane terms about what is obviously ethnic cleansing and genocide. I'm simply speaking of it in terms that, military.
But it's true. I mean, you're either going to kill everybody or expel everybody. There is no way around that. I mean,
there's no other way to defeat them permanently.
Yeah, exactly.
And Israel has tried for the last 2 years, and they have not succeeded, right? They've openly admitted that Hamas has completely replenished its ranks. Of course, you killed tens of thousands, if not 100,000 Palestinians or more, and every one of those has family members who are now aggrieved and have picking up arms against you. Of course, that would happen. I said that would, I mean, not just me, of course, many other people out there right away said that's all you're going to do, right? Unless you remove the entire population. So we know, I mean, it's a matter of public Western media record that Blinken went to Egypt and Jordan previously and tried to get them to open their borders to facilitate Israel doing this. They outright refused. But even more than that, right? This is the accelerated time schedule. On a slower time schedule, this has already been the policy and practice of every single U.S. and Israeli president since the 1960s, right? Every single one, hands down. Since Truman did videos openly talking about it during the creation. I mean, go out there and look, Truman, Palestine. I mean, you will outright see there that he's like, well, you got two people that both want the same land. We got to move the Arabs out, to move the Jews in. I mean, that he openly declared that. It's just that previously, for all these decades, it was something being done without admitting what was being done. And it happened at a level of a house, a village, a settlement bulldozed and recolonized with settlers, right? That is the settlers process. You move the Palestinians out, you bring in more immigrants, Jewish immigrants from Europe, from the United States, even from the former Soviet Union, and you settle them in their place. That has been going on. That is an ongoing slow motion process of ethnic cleansing that no one openly admits to, that the United States and Israel have made policy for decades. Now it's simply being done on an accelerated timetable. But the initiative to do that began with Blinken and Biden, not Trump. Trump is just being more open and forceful and mafia don-like in his announcement of it, right? He's will convince Egypt and Jordan to open the borders, right?
And I guess that's the
don't
question.
worry, I'll
Do you
it, right?
think they'll be able to do that? I mean, Jordan and Egypt told Biden outright, no, this is not something we're going to allow. This is not something that we're okay with. Does Trump have the leverage to do this?
Yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Really? You think he does?
The Jordanian government is a complete quisling of the U.S., right? Of the UK and the US, right? Completely, 100%, right? Whatever domestic political problems it will create for them, certainly the West has the screws to put to them, right? To cut their funding, everything else. And Egypt, almost as many, because to a very large extent, the Egyptian military is and has been for decades funded by the United States, right? That's why Egypt is the biggest single recipient of U.S. military aid after Israel, right? Before the age of Ukraine, right? And that the only two countries excluded from the military suspension, at least by name, in the most recent are Egypt and Israel. So there's lots of screws there. Egypt is a very poor country. Now, it will create enormous domestic problems for them, right? The last thing that they want is another 3, 4, 5, because I want to be clear, we're not actually just talking Gaza here. The intention isn't just Gaza. It's the West Bank too. They're talking about ethnic cleansing because while the Gaza ceasefire has gone into effect, nearly unreported in the Western media is the fact that Israel has increased the bombing of the West Bank, right? In the past few weeks, right? Since the ceasefire in Gaza came into effect and you've had the hostage exchange on both sides. And it's quite obvious. And Israeli media, Israeli politicians are now, for the first time, openly talking about annexing the West Bank as well. I mean, they're not hiding it. It's not being repeated very often in the Western media, but that is what the Israeli media is openly talking about. A recent poll showed that 3% of the Israeli population is against the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. That
sounds about right.
3%,
sounds low.
Right?
Even sounds low.
That tells you what a radicalized population Israel has at this point and how they are willing, right, for anything, including they're eager, if anything, to just remove the Palestinian problem as they see it once and for all, right, to claim greater Israel. Everything says it's going to happen. Trump has openly endorsed it for the first time, right, and tried to present it in the most clumsy and ham-fisted way as a humanitarian gesture.
Right.
And even the way he put it, after we rebuild it and the U.S. owns Gaza and turns it in the rich area, people from the area will be able to move back in. He didn't even admit we'll bring the Palestinians back, right? No, we all know what he's talking about. He's talking about the Israelis. He's talking about the Jews. So this is the first time. This is a normalization of genocide in Israel. That's what Trump is doing right now. Whether U.S. troops are actively involved, Trump has already sent 2,000-pound bombs so that they can turn the rest of Palestine into, to the forcible part of the forcible displacement of the rest of the Palestinian population, so that they'll be able to level the remaining faster with 2,000-pound bombs. He also promised another 7 to 8 billion in military aid, again, just in the last week to Israel. So they're restocking, they're rearming, resupplying, the Israeli military in preparation for that. And everyone wondered, why did Netanyahu suddenly accept a ceasefire that he had previously refused, right, with a hostage exchange deal from the Biden administration? Why did he suddenly, with just rolled over and accepted that ceasefire that he
Here's
had
why.
rejected, or a year earlier. And I said right at the time on this show, there's a carrot and a stick, and we don't know what the carrot and the stick were. Right? We still don't know what the stick was, but the carrot was, you give me the ceasefire that I promised now for my inauguration and make everything look nice, and then I'll fully support the forcible displacement of Palestinians from Palestine.
How is that going to work? I mean, this is going to create a hornet's nest, to put it mildly.
Absolutely. Right. A lot of people are saying that it's unworkable, so that it's not going to happen. I would say, if not unworkable, then extremely still, obviously incredibly problematic, but it is going to happen. Right? Now, recall that in the last year, what we have seen is the vast majority of the population of the Gaza Strip, including the entire population of the city of Gaza, driven out of Gaza into a tiny corner of the Gaza Strip right along the Egyptian border. That already happened. Millions of Palestinians were already displaced. It's not that much harder to do it again, particularly when you've already destroyed Gaza. Now, it will be more difficult, of course, for the West Bank, and they're not right up against the Egyptian border. That's where Jordan comes in. But if you don't think the process can be repeated there, then, Hamas at least fought back. I don't even know if the Palestinian Authority will fight back. They've never fought back before. Why would they do it now, the Quislings, right? How would it happen? It would happen exactly like has already happened since the October 7th attacks. The only difference being
the Egyptian border,
knocking down of Egypt and Jordan's, unwillingness to lower their borders up until this point.
Just wow. I mean, you are right. They have been able to effectively force people to move from point A to point B.
Millions of people they forced out of their homes. They've already done it. It has already happened.
So right? The only difference this time around is just the Egyptian border is open, and those people move and keep moving into Egypt.
Yes.
Oh, this is going to create chaos.
People keep saying it's not workable. I'm like, well, I mean, it's not going to be pretty, but it has already happened. The only difference being is that the Egyptian border wasn't open to drive them through.
Now, does the Jordanian government, I've heard some people make the point of saying if Jordan does this or Egypt does this, their governments are going to collapse.
It's possible.
So you do see that as being an outcome, potentially.
Sure. It will create enormous, first, political outcry between the portion of their populations that actually support the Jordan. Remember, there's still large numbers of Palestinian refugees from the first Nakba in Jordan and Egypt, right?
It's like 60%, some insane number. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, millions, right? I mean, they're already there. Second of all, there are sympathetic parts of both of those countries to the Palestinian people. Third of all, even the people that aren't theoretically sympathetic to the Palestinians being driven out of their homes and lands, now you're going to saddle them with millions of Palestinian refugees, right? Competing with them for jobs, lowering low-wage jobs, housing, all sorts of things, creating more food insecurity and to portions of the population in those countries that are already on a day-to-day level of stress of living hand to mouth, making their economic situation even worse because they'll have to compete with millions of more of refugees. So yes, that is the classic recipe that the governments of Jordan and Egypt have feared. I mean, look at both of those countries have incredibly young populations, right? There's been a huge boom of people, right, in the under 30 age, under 30 demographic, right? Huge numbers of young people compared to previous generations, right? And large numbers of those are effectively unemployed. It's a huge struggle, right? Part of the struggle for Egypt, for the Egyptian economy, and to a lesser but similar degree for Jordan as well. And that's before, right, you add millions of more refugees into the mix, right? And keep in mind, the Egyptian government that's in power now, Sisi, they hate Hamas. Right?
Right.
They don't like Hamas, right? They
Muslim Brotherhood,
themselves overthrew an actually popularly elected Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood government, and they regard Hamas as just the Muslim Brotherhood across the border, as Islamists, right? They hate them. They don't want to protect them, but they also don't want their country inundated with Hamas in even greater numbers, even more, along with the refugee population that comes with them. But again, the U.S. has huge leverage over Egypt. The only thing probably standing in the way of this right now is Saudi Arabia.
Right. Saudi Arabia is saying they want a separate state.
Financial backer of the Egyptian government, and they have put out very strong statements against these ideas, but with Trump's, and outright saying that there would be no normalization of relations with Israel, which had been the big plan of the Abraham Accords for the first Trump administration, right? They've outright said now that will not happen until there is an internationally, meaning U.S. and Israeli recognized Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem. The two-state solution. Meanwhile, these words, the idea of a two-state solution has just completely dropped off the Israeli political board. They don't even talk about it anymore, right? They don't even accept that that's a possibility, right? Much less the one-state solution where Israelis and Arabs live together, right? That's not the solution. Now there is only a final solution. Right, because that's all they're talking about. A one-state, but the only state is Israel. Right, that is. And if you don't think that there aren't plenty of people in Israel that see the potential collapse of the Jordanian government and the Egyptian potential destabilization of the Egyptian government, just making things easier for future acquisition of Greater Israel, because they regard Jordan as part of their territory as well.
Right.
Yeah. All the
From
way
the
up
river to the sea.
Syria and everywhere else. They've recently taken more land in Syria as their own since the overthrow of Assad by Al-Qaeda there. Right. The woke Al-Qaeda that the West is, or Turkey in particular, but the West is supporting there, or at least tacitly accepting there for the moment. All of this is going on, right? And it just, everything is in flux in the Middle East. It is a time now that the Syrian government has disappeared and Trump has come back on the stage of possibility. Things can radically change, right? And at the same time, we have an Iranian government that is, compared to its predecessors, perhaps excessively passive, and wanting to an excessive degree to avoid conflict with the United States and Israel. We've already seen, Hezbollah,
if not destroyed, damaged.
Very damaged, very damaged. You can say that they fought the Israeli military to a standstill in southern Lebanon. Yes, but at a huge cost, a cost to their leadership, a cost to their political levels. And now, according to reports, the Lebanese military is taking up positions that were previously held by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Now, to what extent that is really true and Hezbollah is actually gone, I cannot say. But I do know that didn't happen at all after the ceasefire that ended the last such conflict against Hezbollah in the 2000s. And all indications is that Iran is less willing under Pezeshkian to, come onto the line to defend the axis of resistance, be it in Hezbollah, be it in Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq and Syria, be it the Houthis, the Ar Salah movement in Yemen.
Right.
This government, and part of that, it might very well be the strategic partnership that they recently signed with Russia. They know if they have the time, right? If they have 5 years for Russia to help, build them a powerful air defense and electronic warfare network, that they'll be in 5 years, in a much better position to withstand Israeli and U.S. long-range strikes than they are now, but they need that time. And
Right.
if the Palestinian don't think that Israel sees Syrian government gone, Iran in a period of, shall we say, reconsolidation, right, and building up their own defenses. And if you think Israel doesn't see a window of opportunity here to remove the Palestinian problem within a time frame, I mean, these things are all
expediting
calculations.
They're expediting their plans. That's what seems to be taking place.
The window of opportunity.
One last thing before I let you go. Zelensky, it is clear at this point that Donald Trump wants Zelensky gone. I mean, at the point where he's saying we need to have elections. Zelensky comes back and effectively
said, didn't say that. Trump didn't say that.
Trump didn't say that he wanted elections. And
Kellogg said that he wanted them. No, there's a difference. There is a difference. I'm sorry, there is. But I believe that Trump probably would like to get rid of Zelensky. But Zelensky immediately started suddenly agreeing to negotiations with Putin and other things that he hadn't before, and still denying, right? If we suddenly have elections in Ukraine, that will mean destabilization and we'll lose our military and everything else.
He's saying the military is going to have to come back to make votes. He's saying that this is purely just a Russian plan to destabilize Ukraine. And apparently he's asking for some kind of assurances for economic and military, if indeed they have these elections, which I, under no circumstances, understand. When the U.S. was having its civil war, we still had elections. Zelensky is effectively saying he would have to remove the martial law declaration in order to do this. Okay, this seems to be nonsense to me. He just doesn't want to have elections.
So one, yes, Russia is quite confident that this would further destabilize the regime in Kiev. It would, right? There's no question it would, right?
Yeah.
So yes, Russia would like that and is encouraging that. And that's certainly part of Russia's calculation when they push that Zelensky is illegitimate to actually sign any settlement, right? Both are true. Right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. One, yes, there is wiggle room that any future, if Zelensky signed anything. And two, having elections would destabilize Ukraine, right? They have tenuous control of a lot of their territory to begin with, right? Yet, would it be impossible to hold elections? No. Would it be extremely politically and even militarily problematic, socially problematic? Yes, it would, right? It would be difficult. It would be problematic. And then, of course, you have the very likely result, if there's even a blind, deaf, and dumb donkey on the ballot next to
He'd lose.
That the blind, deaf, and dumb donkey would be elected instead of Zelensky. So, yeah,
right.
But there are multiple reasons. Personally, the fact that they are at an existential war, and this is certainly an existential war for the Kiev regime, and if the Kiev regime keeps on fighting too long, for an independent state of Ukraine itself, right? And to expect them to have elections, right? They've never had democratic elections to begin with since 2014. They've already lustrated, pogromed, and banned the entire non-Maidan, political representation of the country, right? All the political parties of East Ukraine have been banned. All the media voices, critical of the Maidan, all the critical media has been banned in the country. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is undergoing a very real pogrom, right? There's nothing democratic going on in that country since 2014, which is why I don't understand why all the fuss about Zelensky being illegitimate now because his term expired. That regime has always been illegitimate as far as I'm concerned. But yes, it would be extremely problematic to hold elections. And this is both a tactic and a legitimate legal concern by Russia. It's both.
I guess so. I get that. But
Zelensky suddenly starts agreeing to things that Trump wants, you won't hear about elections coming out of the U.S. again. Right? This is leverage, right? If he doesn't play ball with what Trump wants, then yes, the U.S. will push for elections, right? If he plays ball, then you will hear the whole Kellogg, there should be elections in Ukraine rhetoric dropped. That's the way this works.
I guess I'm looking at this from a different angle, though. If a blind, deaf, and donkey would win, put up against Zelensky, then that means the public wants something else. Meaning, at the last poll, I think it was Gallup, it was like 50-something% of the public wanted the war to stop, even if it meant giving up territory for the war to stop. And so you get Zelensky, who they're calling messianic, who they're calling delusional, now trying to get 18 to 24-year-olds with a special contract that they would never get to fulfill to get into the war. So I look at this and I say, okay, well, the public wants something else.
A stealth conscription of young people is what is being built up in stages. Right.
But they know that it's a year contract, and you have some cases where these people last for 4 hours.
If the Maidan regime holds an election, the other people on the ballot will be Zelensky, the Banderite general of Ukraine, a committed ideological Banderite, Poroshenko, the former candy oligarch president of Ukraine, possibly Yulia Tymoshenko, right? The West Ukrainian populist gas princess godmother, right? These are the potential opponents they will face, because you won't see any political representatives of the majority of people of East Ukraine because all of their parties have been banned. So yes, you will destabilize Ukraine. Yes, you'll get rid of the problem of Zelensky, but you might get someone actually far more committed and capable like Zelensky, whom in previous polling, when matched up against Zelensky in Ukraine, was accepted, right? It all depends on what options you offer the Ukrainian people. If you're not offering them a peace candidate, then they will still choose Zelensky over Zelensky, and that's not necessarily better for this conflict, for Russia, or for the people of Ukraine. But there's that blind, deaf, and dumb donkey again. When I say that they'll vote for anyone and anything, democracy is always management, right? I mean, look at in the U.S. You are presented with the choice between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and pretended like that's somehow democracy. That's not, right? That is always. It is not only selecting the lesser of two evils. It is selecting the lesser of two incompetent idiots, right? So
it wasn't a choice.
It's always about management. There is no choice, right? And
it wasn't a choice.
If you actually held elections under the Kiev regime, it would and the regime withstood the political destabilization pressure of holding an election, which is not clear, then it would likely result in someone like Zelensky taking power, which would be no better and probably worse, because Zelensky would probably make better decisions to maintain the Kiev regime than Zelensky himself would, because Zelensky is a madman, and I mean his own people call him delusional, and he grates on everyone. Don't think that getting rid of Zelensky will necessarily make the situation in Ukraine any better, as long as that regime is still, the Maidan regime is still in place.
Mark, man, I always appreciate talking to you, Mark. Your explanation of the stuff is fantastic.
Sorry for the black pill. Sorry.
No,
for the
man,
laugh.
you're perfectly fine. I just want this war to be over with. And
Yeah, we all do, but don't hold your breath. Don't hold your breath.
the man himself, Mark Sloboda, international relations and security analyst. I want to get the sound right. You can find Mark on Twitter at Mark Sloboda1. You can also find him on his YouTube channel at Real Politic with Mark Sloboda. And you can find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, man, thank you for this. Always appreciate your breakdowns. I really do.
Thanks for having me.
Have a good one. Yeah, you heard it from the man himself. Getting rid of Zelensky doesn't necessarily change the situation for the better. And this is effectively where we are. To add to this, for one part, this came out. So Mike Waltz is apparently going to the European Union. And while Mike Waltz is in the European Union, apparently he's going there to have conversations about how to end the war. All right, fair enough. You can imagine that that's not necessarily going to be a conversation that they are going to want to have. But this is Waltz. And listen to what he says here. Because what he is effectively saying is that he wants to recoup the money that the United States has spent on Ukraine. I'm enamored by this. But it's not Trump's war. Trump doesn't see it as his war. And part of what Trump has been doing is to get money back into the U.S. This is Waltz fulfilling that agenda.
On the table this week, including the future of U.S. aid to Ukraine. We need to recoup those costs, and that is going to be a partnership with the Ukrainians in terms of their rare earths, their natural resources, and their oil and gas, and also buying ours. Those conversations are going to happen this week, and I think an underlying principle here is that the Europeans have to own this conflict going forward. President Trump is going to end it. And then in terms of security guarantees, that is squarely going to be with the Europeans.
We're way out of time, but who do you like for the Super Bowl?
Security guarantees are going to entirely be with the Europeans. And more to the point, they are going to have to own this war. Now, here's the rub. If indeed they're talking about ending the war, then there's not really a war to own if indeed you're talking about ending the war. Nevertheless, he is effectively saying, if you want security guarantees, you have some nice minerals over there. Hey, you have some nice oil over there. Hey, we love your grain. That looks great. Maybe you should give us some of that in order for us to continue protection of your country. If you want to keep getting weapons, maybe you need to send us rare earth minerals. If you want to, continue in some capacity as a state, hey, maybe you need to send us some of your oil or whatever they have at their disposal that at this point the United States apparently want to get their hands on. That is astonishing because it's just extortion. It's just extortion. They've led Ukraine down this particular pathway, and now that they're down this particular pathway and they can't necessarily do anything in their own regard, it's all right. You're completely dependent upon us. Pay us. Pay us, pay me, give me something in order to keep this arrangement going. Also, as Mark points out, I just want this war to be over with. I just want this war to be over with. And Donald Trump, one of his main campaign things was, I'm going to end the war. Now, the catch is always, how do you do that? And how do you do that in a way that A, makes sense, and B, if your name is Donald Trump, allows you to stand there holding up Putin's hand saying, I did what I said I was going to do. I ended the war. And on top of it, to not look bad doing it. Meaning both sides on some level are going to have to come to some kind of terms where both save face, even if the face save is purely propagandistic. What does that look like? I have no idea. This notion of freezing a conflict is a non-starter. And so whatever conversations that are taking place on a low level in order to set up some kind of Putin-Trump summit, who knows? Those negotiations seem to be taking place. I mean, even the Russian side, even if that conversation takes place on multiple levels. What those conversations are, who knows? And as Mark pointed out, the New York Post did not give any quotes. They did not nail anything down in regards to what Donald Trump said, short of Trump said he talked to Putin. Russia's being squirrely about it. Yeah. We'll see. Look, this has been going on for what, 3 years at this point? And so we are 3 years into this particular conflict. And apparently it's just going to keep going on, going on, and going on. And the soft conscription of trying to create an incentive to get kids into it is grotesque. Utterly grotesque. This part. Special contracts for kids to get into the war. And yes, I call them kids. An 18-year-old to me is a kid. He or she is a teenager. So they are effectively saying they're coming up with these one-year contracts with the idea of additional money in order to convince 18 to 24-year-olds to get into the war. This is a middle ground position. And the middle ground position in this case is because they don't necessarily want to have an outright draft of 18 to 24. The U.S. has been putting pressure on Kiev in order to bring kids into the war. Up to this point, they've said no, and they have resisted doing so. Well, now, in the position that they find themselves in, deeply hurting in regards to manpower, deeply hurting in regards to the number of people who have effectively deserted and abandoned their posts because they didn't necessarily want to be the last person to die in a losing war. And so this is the position that they find themselves, where they feel forced to do something that they know the population is going to be against and that they don't necessarily want to do themselves. So their way of getting around this is to say, hey, let's have a special contract. And this contract will last for a year, and we will give you extra money and benefits for the year of your service. Okay, well, why do I call this gruesome? It's deceptive. You have some reports that came out from a U.S. Marine, this was reported in the Telegraph, the British media, that the lifespan of a Ukrainian soldier, depending upon where they are in the battlefield, might be as low as 4 hours. And even if you give them the benefit of the doubt, what if it's 3 months? That contract is for a year. So you are given a contract that I guarantee you there are pencil pushers that have already figured out how much of this do we have to pay out. Meaning based on the average 18-year-old that's going to die, how much of this will we most likely have to pay out? How much of this will we most likely have to cover? I guarantee you that that math has already been done. And that's assuming that the Ukrainian state remains intact. It's a contract that very well may never be fulfilled. That's my point. They know that when they offered it. It's grotesque, it's cynical, and it is gruesome, to put it mildly. There's another one. I'm waiting on Kit to join. Hopefully he will be joining shortly. I'm going to preempt this clip because this is fantastic. So Elon Musk put out this tweet, if I can find it, right here. Elon Musk put out this tweet. Now, I am one of those people that believes it is horrendous for somebody like Musk to be put in a position where he is dealing with things like the Treasury, or for that matter, dealing with things associated with the military. Donald Trump has effectively given him this kind of vague position, and he's gone out with this vague position, trying to instigate or investigate all sorts of stuff that I would say he has no right to be anywhere near. But he said something that I do think is true. I just would prefer he wasn't the one who's saying it. So right here, American weapons programs need to be completely redone. The current strategy is to build small number of weapons at high price to fight yesterday's wars. Unless there's immediate and dramatic changes made, America will lose the next war very badly. Now, again, I have asked this question over and over again, whether or not we're getting bang for the buck for the things that we invest in. Think about it for a moment. The U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion a year for the military. How do you know that what they're spending that money on is commensurate with, let's say, the force that you expect to be exerted from what they've spent that money on? The reason why I bring this up, several years ago, I watched a documentary. I used to watch this thing called American Crime, or America. American Greed, I believe it was called. And in one of the videos, it was a couple, two women, who were selling like nuts, bolts, selling these kind of little items to the American military. And what they found was, through an accident, that if you charge, whatever you charge, they would pay. So if I sent, let's say, a shipment of bolts, and I say, these bolts were worth $1,000, they would send a check for $1,000. There was no oversight. You send in the request, they send you the cash, you keep it moving. When they figured that out, they were off to the races. And they did this to the tune of millions of dollars, and they did it for years without any oversight or anybody catching them. The only reason they got caught was because they got greedy. They sent in a request, let's say for $1,000 for a few bolts. And apparently they sent in the request twice by accident. Finally, you got somebody say, well, wait a minute. This seems to be excessive. In which case, a person started to look at it, and a person started to interrogate what was effectively happening. And after that, those people were criminally prosecuted. They're criminally prosecuted. Do we believe that they are the only ones to find that glitch? And if the military is not being audited, then how do we know that the money is being spent in the way they're saying the money is being spent? It is very weird to have something where you're using $1 trillion, give or take, without any capacity to audit how that money is being spent. So when Musk points this out, he's not entirely wrong. We're watching a Ukrainian battlefield right now that is very different than many of the wars that were fought in the past using different weapon systems, drones being one of those predominant weapon systems in the fray, in the fight. When you see something like the F-35, where they've spent billions, and half of the time the thing doesn't work, something is wrong. Something is wrong. Jon Stewart is having a conversation. And listen, well, first, before I get to the Jon Stewart thing, take a look at this clip. Listen to what he says here, because what he is pointing to is something that is very similar to what I pointed out with those two women that got prosecuted for the exact same thing.
This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, don't need a high school diploma. It's not anything high tech about this. All of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000.
$90,000. $90,000. And you're telling me that the military doesn't need an audit? That is outrageous. But again, this goes to exactly the point that I'm making. You're spending $1 trillion a year on military. How much grift is in that $1 trillion? And if you're not looking into it, how would you know? So yes, Musk has a point that this is problematic. Something needs to be done about this. We need to pay attention and look into this and make a decision on whether or not we're getting the bang for the buck. It should not be him. It should not be him. Jon Stewart is having a conversation. I was fascinated by this conversation. And this was Jon Stewart doing good work. He is talking to, I think this is, okay, Kathleen Hicks. This was Biden #2 at the Pentagon. Now listen to what Stewart says and listen to her response. Her response is completely absurd. Completely absurd. Listen to what she says, though.
To be doing, like, there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse within a system.
Audits and waste, fraud, and abuse are not the same thing. So let's decompose these.
Please educate me on
sure. So an audit is
difference.
Exactly what you just described,
Yes.
which is, do I know what was delivered to which place?
Right.
The ability to pass an audit, or the fact that the DoD has not passed an audit, is not suggestive of waste, fraud, and abuse. That is completely false right there. So
what is
now is a question of, it's suggestive that we don't have an accurate inventory that we can pull up of what we have where.
The inability to pass an audit is not necessarily indicative of waste, fraud, and abuse. It just means that we don't know where things are. That's all. We just can't figure out where. That's all. Doesn't mean waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, fair enough. As an absolute, fair enough. You not being able to identify who you sold to what, how much, what was paid for what, who paid for, you not being able to identify that does not, by definition, means that it is waste, fraud, and abuse. It damn sure looks like it. It damn sure looks like it. And the fact that you can't do that. I mean, think, why do we have audits of anything? We have audits of anything because we know that a system that goes unchecked, especially when you're putting that much money into it, is ripe with fraud. It's ripe with abuse. It is slim pickings for abuse, meaning not even slim pickings. It is fat pickings for abuse. We have, checks on things because we accept, just as a practice, that if you don't look at it, who knows what's happening with it? And as I pointed out, that couple that was able to scam the military for all of that money, or the Congress member that was putting out all of the money that was being spent for something that probably maybe cost $1,000 in real terms, they were paying like $90,000 for it. It is all some level understood that you have audits to prevent stuff like that from happening. Now, if her argument is, well, this doesn't by definition means that there's waste, fraud, and abuse. Okay, fair enough. It doesn't by definition mean it, but it damn sure looks like it. It damn sure looks like it, especially if you are spending that much cheddar on that issue. Yes, obviously, we should be prepared for the next conflict. I would prefer us not get involved in the next conflict. But for all intents and purposes, you have a military, and the military is designed to fight wars. Fair enough. This comes across as a grift more than anything else. She may not want to own it. You may have a lot of people in the Pentagon that may not want to own it. You may have a lot of Democrats that may be screaming at the top of their mind or at the top of their lungs because they themselves are not necessarily the ones in charge or in control. And they are going to try to point fingers at Elon Musk. As Nancy Pelosi pointed out, they're going to drill down on the notion of Elon Musk. He is going to be one of the major focal points. But let's be clear. We're spending $1 trillion a year, and they can't pass an audit to see where that money is going or how much of that money is being spent and what it's being spent on. That is outrageous. That is outrageous. So when Musk comes out and points out, okay, we are going to lose the next war if we do not revamp, change up, and switch our tactics in regards to how we're spending money, he is probably right. If you're talking about a war with China or a war with Russia, you may be talking about a losing war. So he's not wrong, but it's Musk the guy to do that. It's Musk the guy to do that. My issue is that, not what he's saying. It's the fact that it's Musk that they're talking about in this context. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. You have two things that are happening at once. Yes, there should be an analysis of how we spend money in this country. Obviously, it's Musk, who clearly has a dog in this hunt. Is he the guy to do it? Is he the guy to do it? That is the question that I will pose. That is the angle to which I would take on this. And yeah, I'm taking somewhat of a split the baby in half, but it's just true. It's just true. Let's go to another story. The Hannibal Directive. Hannibal Directive. This is pretty hardcore, to put it mildly. This is pretty hardcore. So this is Yoav Gallant. He was fired. He was defense minister of Israel. Now, this is in a different language, but I'm going to play it out. I thought the text was at the bottom. The text is apparently not at the bottom. Oh, it is at the bottom. Good. Gallant is being interviewed and is being asked about October 7th. And in being asked about October 7th, read what he says. I apologize to the people who are not able to see this. But read what he says. I'll come back after the fact to explain and give a little bit more context. Former defense minister talking about A, the Hannibal Directive, and B, negotiations in regards to saying we didn't do everything that we could to get the hostages back. This is an astonishing interview.
ישירות, אני חושב שבאופן טקטי במקומות שונים ניתנה, במקומות אחרים לא ניתנה, וזו בעיה. ישירות, אני חושב שבאופן טקטי במקומות שונים ניתנה, במקומות אחרים לא ניתנה, וזו בעיה. ישירות, אני חושב שבאופן טקטי במקומות שונים ניתנה.
They're asking him, was the Hannibal Directive in effect? And he says, tactically, in some places, yes. Effectively, yeah, it was in effect. We did use the Hannibal Directive in dealing with this. What's wild in the Hannibal Directive is effectively, we are willing to kill our own citizens in order to prevent those citizens from being taken hostage. That's the directive. So if there is an Israeli that is about to be captured, and we have the ability to kill a Hamas fighter, but we have to kill both, we will kill both. That is what we will do as a policy, not as a mistake, not as a bug, as a feature. It is a policy. And so on October 7th, when the reporting came out and said many of these people were being killed by Israel itself, they were like, oh, no, there's no way. That's not something that would happen. That's not something that Israel would do. Well, not so much. Not so much they would do it. It was their policy. So in real terms, we don't know exactly how many people Israel killed on that day. And for the 1,200 that's attributed to Hamas, who knows what that number is? Now, from my point of view, if Hamas killed 600 or 700, 800, I don't see a dramatic difference in 800 to 1,200. Yes, there is a major difference in regards to the loss of life, but we're still talking a lot of people being killed. I'm just pointing out that at this point, Gallant is no longer hiding the ball and is openly owning up to the fact that they killed their own people on that day. They killed some of their own people on that day. Also, Gallant goes further in that interview, and he points out that they didn't do everything that they could in order to get the hostages back. That Netanyahu was offered the same deal and refused that deal that effectively he ended up taking in order to get the hostages back when Donald Trump got in office. Now, it's more complicated than that, obviously, because, in the conversation that we were having with Mark made it pretty clear that it seems that it was a quid pro quo. If you give me the hostages back, if you accept this deal, I will let you ethnically cleanse the West Bank, and I will let you ethnically cleanse Gaza. That seemed to be the deal. And so, yeah, of course, hey, have your hostages back. Sure, I'll take this deal. Because at the very end of it, the objectives that we were trying to accomplish as a settler colonial state of Israel to expand from the river to the sea may be accomplished under Donald Trump, since the American president seems to be okay with it and seems to be willing to use whatever leverage is at his disposal to effect this Israel first agenda. This is astonishing. It's astonishing. Mark is also right. Iran has been pretty passive in all of this. Yes, they've done their strike. It was the first time that they've done that strike, and they've been exchanging back and forth between Israel and Iran. But during the time where you're talking about Hezbollah, you're talking about, let's say, the axis of resistance, Iran has been somewhat more timid in dealing with this and didn't necessarily go all in while all of the other forces were engaged. Hezbollah, or for that matter, the Houthis, were effectively having that fight on their own with Iran somewhat in the background, making threats that they didn't necessarily deliver on, at the very least for True Promise 3. So it is amazing. Keep that clip. Keep that clip. Because you're going to get people, a lot of people, who don't want to own up to the fact that that was their objective, and that is what they did on that day. That is what they did on that day. Ryan Grimm. Let's talk about Ryan Grimm. Ryan Grimm tends to do really good reporting at Drop Zone News. And I've used plenty of his pieces on this show because he does damn good reporting. Donald Trump, when he got in, started to destabilize and eliminate many offices of the US government, firing people across the board in various departments, especially in departments that he thought had any hand in going after him, or for that matter, any hand in backing and protecting Americans. Meaning he's also destroying parts or companies, or let's say parts of the government that were affecting and protecting Americans. One of those organizations was the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Obviously, somebody like Elon Musk, or let's say the tech sector, does not want this bureau to be as full-throated as, let's say, I would want that bureau to be. The entire point of that bureau, I believe it was created under Obama, was to protect people in financial circumstances for the various companies and everything else in order to recoup money that people might have lost through some kind of shady dealings with various companies or whatever else. Listen to Grimm, because he breaks down part of the reason that they wanted to defang the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And what he's pointing out is a lot of this stuff boils down to the tech sector trying to find a way to make an extra buck at our expense. When you open up a bank account, there's certain rules that the bank has to follow in order to ensure that worst come to worst, you will get your money back. So there's a certain amount of capital that they need to have on hand. Tech bros who have a lot of money would like to create bank-ish organizations without the same protections and rule sets that we use to govern banks. And part of them going after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was to allow that reality to take place. Effectively, they're destroying an entity in the federal government that was used to protect Americans in order to make an extra buck at the expense of those same Americans. This is Grimm breaking this down. He does a damn good job at explaining this. I'm going to let him explain it. It's a few minutes long, but I think it's a good breakdown. I don't want to piggyback this on Trump saying, sure, I trust Elon. Sure, I trust Elon. And I'm looking at the clip like, you're a stupid idiot if you do. Unless your objectives align. And if your objectives align, fair enough. But don't give me this America First stuff when you're doing things that are going after this idea of what is in the best interest of Americans. This is Drop Zone breaking it down.
So I talked my Breaking Points colleague Crystal into joining TikTok. So go find her over at Crystal Ball One. This is an old person takeover on this app, but go over there, welcome her. Her first post is about Elon Musk's shutting down of the CFPB. And I wanted to add one thing to what she says in her TikTok or whatever you call these videos. So when the Treasury Secretary sent out the email stopping work at the CFPB, he seems to have realized that he forgot something. And then he quickly sent a second, basically all staff, all CFPB email that said, okay, not only are we definitely stopping work on everything, but you cannot designate any entities as non-bank entities. So think about that. Why would they do that? Why would he single out this one thing that on top of everything else, you also most definitely cannot do? What does that mean? What does it mean to designate something as non-bank? Well, Silicon Valley is trying to make themselves a bunch of banks. They call it fintech. Elon Musk is one of those people. He wants to team up with Visa. He wants you to be able to basically use X as a banking app, but he doesn't want to be regulated like a bank, because if you're regulated like a bank, you have to get audited, that people come poking around, and you have to have a certain amount of capital on hand at all times, so that if people want to take their money out of their deposit, that the money is there. Sam Bankman-Fried, for instance, is in prison because he was basically running an operation that was very similar to a bank, and he was taking the deposits of his depositors, and then he was gambling with that money. That is essentially what Silicon Valley wants to be able to do, and they want to get around all of the FDIC regulations, SEC, and in particular, the CFPB, which was making a real push in saying, wait a minute, what you guys are doing looks a lot like banking, and so you're going to have to follow the rules of banks. And so Silicon Valley, in the form of Elon Musk, is saying, no, we're actually not going to do that. We're just going to shut you down. And so I wanted to highlight this one because it is so far the...
I hope that's clear in what he's saying here, that effectively the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was requiring these tech companies to effectively be banks if indeed they were going to take over the operations of banks. So think of it like PayPal. PayPal may be a good example, or something similar to PayPal. And they want to be able to exchange money in the way that PayPal exchanges money. But they don't necessarily want to say, well, we're a bank. Because if we call ourselves a bank, we're stuck with certain rules and regulations that banks also are stuck with. And so what they decided to do was, let's just get rid of the Consumer CFPB. Let's just get rid of it. If we get rid of it, then we don't have an entity in the US that puts rule sets on us. We can just eliminate the entity that is trying to regulate that particular industry. Just astonishing. I'm going to let him finish on this since most of this was already said.
Most egregious case of an agency that is actually doing good. A lot of people have pointed out that it costs the taxpayer less than $1 billion. It actually doesn't cost the taxpayer. It's the Federal Reserve that funds it, but that's beside the point. It's less than $1 billion a year, and it has returned almost $20 billion to consumers in the roughly 10 years that it's been around. But it's not just that $20 billion. Think about all of the money that wasn't stolen because companies knew that if they did it, they would get caught. That's the real value in having law enforcement towards criminals like these scammers. It's nice to catch them and get somebody their money back, but you would actually prefer not to be ripped off in the first place. So anyway, I guess good luck with all of this.
Yeah, good luck with all of this. Don't give me this stuff that Donald Trump is in this to make America great again. There are things that he's going to do that I'm going to agree with. But let's be very clear. Tax cuts, those tax cuts are going to benefit the wealthy more than it's going to benefit, let's say, somebody like me or somebody like you. And more to the point of tax cuts, he's going to explode the budget. We are already at $35 trillion. That number is only going to go up. And it's not going up because he's making sure people get health care, or he's making sure people get education, or he's doing X or Y. No, it's going to go up because the tax cuts that he's going to pass are going to be so egregious that that money has to come from somewhere to make up government function. Meaning, there's an argument that is often made on the right that tax cuts don't cost anything. Those people are out of their minds. The federal government had to be funded in some capacity. And part of the things that funds that government, yeah, I know. I get the argument that the moment that a federal government makes $1, it makes $1. Fair enough. That stuff still get budgeted, or at the very least, there's still a number attached to that in regards to our deficit, or for that matter, what we owe as an entirety of a country in and of itself. If you are gutting the money that is coming into the federal government, that has to be made up somehow. Meaning when they do those tax cuts are effectively unfunded. He is going to do that. And as Ryan Grimm pointed out, you get somebody like Elon Musk who has a vested interest in getting involved into something like this. The man has billions of dollars. Why wouldn't he be interested in this? And if I'm not mistaken, this was something that came on once before, that it seems that there were certain interests involved in it. Don't give me the stuff that Elon Musk is just a good Samaritan who's just doing God's work for the federal government. And that is the argument that Donald Trump is making. It is an absurd premise, but this is Trump making that case that Elon Musk is just a good Samaritan, and I trust him completely. You should.
I don't know if it's kickbacks or what's going on, but the people, look, I ran on this, and the people want me to find it. And I've had a great help with Elon Musk, who's been terrific.
Bottom line, you say you trust him.
Trust Elon? Oh, he's not gaining anything. In fact, I wonder how he can devote the time to it. He's so into it. But I told.
That is absurd. That is absurd. Look, that is as absurd as Nancy Pelosi being able to bet on the market, or having somebody around her to be able to bet on the market on her behalf. You are in a position where you are looking over, perched, looking at everything. And you are able to make certain decisions either on the market, or for that matter, certain decisions in regards to the ear of the president, what he invests in, what he doesn't invest in, sanctions that he's going to pass, the tariffs he's going to pass. And you're Elon Musk, the world's richest man. And you're telling me that there's no benefit for you in having that level of access and having that level of information in advance. Nonsense. Nonsense. I'm going to let Trump finish. But if he believes this, he's dumber than I thought.
Told him do that, then I'm going to tell him very soon, like maybe in 24 hours, to go check the Department of Education. He's going to find the same thing. Then I'm going to go to the military. Let's check the military. We're going to find billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud and abuse. And, you know, the people elected me on that. I don't know if it's kickbacks or what's going on, but the people, look, I ran on this, and the people want me to find it. And I've had a great help with Elon Musk, who's been terrific.
By the way, I don't doubt that people, let's say on a thin level, is okay with it. I would wager to you that most people don't believe that the government is working in their behalf. I would put that out and wager that. In fact, I would even give that as a given. It is secondary to whether or not what he is doing is in the best interest of America, or for that matter, whether this is being done for the best interest of America, or whether it's being done for the best interest of, let's say, a slice of America, the oligarchs of this country, which is what I strongly suspect is being done. The cutting of those type of things may not necessarily be to our benefit. So yeah, in one sense, I don't take issue with this notion of, okay, well, let's find waste, fraud, and abuse in regards to the money that is being spent by the federal government. Fair enough. No complaint. Making Elon Musk that guy to do it? Oh, you lose me immediately. You lose me immediately. Elon Musk wasn't elected to a pie shop. And for all intents and purposes, I have no reason to believe that what he is looking for is things that are in his own best interests, as opposed to the best interests of the country itself. Those are very different things. It is cartoonish for Donald Trump to sit here saying, I totally trust Elon. Totally. I don't even know what he gets out of it. Really? You don't? You don't? You don't know what the world's richest man is getting out of A, his access to you, and B, access to either the Treasury Department or the Education Department, or for that matter, the military, and how all of those entities spend their money. You can't see to any degree how Musk takes advantage of that. If you can't, as I said, you're dumber than I thought. Or he's just lying. You can pick your pony in regards to which one you think it is. But truth be told, obviously, the world's richest man with the ear of the president and this ability to look into all of these departments, that's assuming that the judges allow him to do so, clearly will have a financial advantage in doing so. Just astonishing that he's saying this nonsense. This is, I'll play it out one more time.
I don't know if it's kickbacks or what's going on, but the people, look, I ran on this, and the people want me to find it. And I've had a great help with Elon Musk, who's been terrific.
Bottom line, you say you trust him.
Trust Elon? Oh, he's not gaining anything. In fact, I wonder how he can devote the time to it. He's so into it. But I told him do that. Then I'm going to tell him very soon, like maybe in 24 hours, to go check the Department of Education. He's going to find the same thing. Then I'm going to go to the military. Let's check the military. We're going to find billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud and abuse. And, you know, the people elected me on that. I don't know if it's kickbacks or what's going on, but the people, look, I ran on this, and the people want me to find it. And I've had a great help with Elon Musk, who's been terrific.
Bottom line, you say you trust him.
Trust Elon? Oh, he's not gaining anything. In fact, I wonder how he can devote the time to it. He's so into it. But I told him do that. Then I'm going to tell him.
So into it. Yeah, I bet he is so into it. Bet he is so into it. One last thing before I get to Maloof. Richard Medhurst. So Richard Medhurst is a journalist out of the UK. And Richard has been doing God's work, especially on the issue of Gaza and Palestine. All right. There is no First Amendment in Europe. It's damn sure not a First Amendment in the United Kingdom. And so Richard doesn't necessarily have the protections of somebody that may have in the United States, where the government doesn't necessarily like you contrasting or, let's say, contesting the narrative that they're putting out. And so they have decided to go after him in a very particular way that is completely disgusting. What they've decided is to say that Richard is a member of Hamas, and as a member of Hamas, they can now criminalize him and criminalize his journalism. And not just criminalize his journalism, also ransack his studio, take his communication devices, and try to threaten him with, I think he said, up to 14 years in prison if he doesn't give the passwords to his devices. Astonishing. We're talking about somebody who's a British Christian that they are saying is a member of Hamas purely for the purpose of criminalizing his speech, or for the matter, criminalizing his journalism. The idea that you have to make a video where you look into the camera and tell people, I am not Hamas, is astonishing. And yet, this is a position that they effectively put Richard in. This is Richard explaining what they have done to him. And not just what they've done to him, the threats that they have effectively put on top of him, saying, you may get 14 years in a cage if you're found guilty. Now, he was arrested in Vienna recently, which is what he's going to talk about in this video. Richard, though, was arrested at the UK airport, I think it was 5 months ago, if I remember correctly, on something very similar. And as he points out, they're trying to say that, no, we have no conversations with the UK, even though the charges that they're going after him with are very similar. This is Richard explaining what is going on with him. The fact that this exists is mind-blowing to me, and yet this is a reality of what they're doing in Europe to go after anybody contesting the narrative that they're putting out on various issues. It's just so happened on this particular issue of Gaza and the genocide that's taking place in Gaza.
My name is Richard Medhurst. I'm an internationally accredited journalist from the UK. On Monday, agents from the Austrian police and intelligence services detained me, raided my home, raided my studio, and then interrogated me. They essentially lured me into a trap. So I received a letter from the government last week from immigration, summoning me for some interview at my residency. I found that a bit odd because I've lived here for a while. I never had any problems. So having nothing to fear, I went to the meeting by myself. And then after a few simple questions, they suddenly issued a thinly veiled threat saying they were considering revoking my residency because of my alleged reporting on Palestine and Lebanon. So of course, my answer was no comment. And as soon as I thought everything was over, I was ambushed by a group of plainclothes agents. They entered the room, flashing their badges in my face, and they said that they were the Austrian equivalent of MI5 or the FBI. They detained me, and then they served me with a warrant from the state prosecutor to search my home, search my studio, take all of my devices. Why? Because they think that I, a Christian Englishman, am a member of Hamas. Yes, you heard that correctly.
Just to be clear, they don't really believe that. There is no way that they really believe that. The Hamas angle is purely to be used to call him a terrorist. And as calling him a terrorist, to then go into his communications, go after, basically to eliminate any freedoms or protections that he might have had available in that particular country. In this case, he was in Vienna when they did this. I'm going to let it play out. I just want to point that out. It's not that they believe it in earnest. It is the fig leaf that they're using to effectively destroy his ability to work in one sense, but B, and more importantly, to do journalism, to do real journalism.
They are accusing me of being a member of Hamas, of being part of the Izz al-Din Qassam brigades, of disseminating propaganda, encouraging terrorism, being affiliated with organized crime and a terrorist group. I mean, it's like reading something out of the Twilight Zone. So they seized my phone, and they drove me to my residence, ransacked the place. They even took devices which I repeatedly told them do not belong to me. Then they drove me to my studio and turned the place upside down. So I had to watch my devices being disassembled before my very eyes by a group of strangers, All these tools that I spent years building and investing in, the core of my journalistic profession. They took, in total, they took like 5-6 different laptops and computers, phones, USB sticks, hard drives, DVDs, you name it. And although the warrant was for electronic devices only, for some reason, they took photos of my residence, photos of the office, of the bathroom. They helped themselves to anything they saw, books, papers, documents, cupboards, closets. To tell you the truth, though, the agents treated me kindly and with respect. They didn't deny me any of my basic needs. Now, as you recall, I was unjustly arrested a few months ago in London. They jailed me for almost 24 hours under the Terrorism Act. Strangely enough, last week, the police in England again extended this investigation. And then suddenly this happens in Vienna. I don't think that is mere coincidence, okay? The first thing I asked the Austrian agents was, did my government put you up to this? And they replied, no, Britain doesn't talk to us. Well, forgive me, but I find that a bit hard to believe. I do think that this persecution, this raid, is related to the case in Britain. I think it's being coordinated with Britain. Now, my colleague, Stefania Marizzi, who works on the Snowden papers with Glenn Greenwald, she reported last month in Il Fatto Quotidiano that the British police seized a graphene OS device from me and that it was very unlikely that they'd be able to crack it. So I suppose that's why Britain asked the Austrians to raid me, grab anything they could find, and go on this massive fishing expedition. The warrant even mentions my arrest in London to try and bolster their case. The Austrian agents, they asked me for the passwords to my devices, and I said no, because as a journalist, I have an ethical, a professional obligation to protect my sources. None of them were compromised. During the raid, I spoke briefly with the techs who were extracting my devices, from one nerd to another. And they told me that if they can't crack the devices, they send them outside sometimes to other countries, to other law enforcement agencies, and ask them for help. So that further indicated to me that this could very well be related to what's happening in the UK against me. Now, all these devices are work devices. They're my journalistic tools. I have been left with literally nothing. I mean, just to film this was a struggle, okay? Believe me. No phone, no computer, no SD cards, nothing. They cut me off from my work, from my contacts, from my family, from my friends. And the next day, they dropped by and give me a list of all the things they seized. It was 19 pages long. As a matter of fact, I've spent the last months writing a book on cybersecurity, as I'm unable to report and work normally under these circumstances. And they even confiscated my book. The book that I've been working on for 2 years now. I just riffled through the manuscripts and the notes like it was nothing. So after watching all of my gear being dismantled, I was then ordered under this warrant to participate in an interrogation. So these agents, they took me down with them to the station, and I said 2 words, no comment. And that was it. Then they fingerprinted me, they palm printed me, they took mugshots and my DNA. And after 6-7 hours of this, I was finally allowed to leave. I categorically deny all of these accusations by the British and Austrian governments. I'm not a terrorist, I am a journalist, and they bloody well know it. Some of these Austrian accusations are very similar to the British ones, which again tells me that this is somehow coordinated. But it's actually a massive escalation. They are accusing me of being a member of a proscribed organization. I mean, this is insanity on another level. This is detached from reality. And they're trying to make a snowball out of nothing. So now, because of my reporting, I'm under investigation for quote unquote terrorism in 2 countries. I could face up to 14 years in prison in the UK, plus another 2 to 5 years if I don't give them the passwords to my phones, and maybe another 10 years in prison in Austria, and my residency potentially being revoked. And why? For what? For journalism, because of my reporting. I mean, this is insane. This is disproportionate state violence. And it's not just an attack on me. This is an attack on the entire profession, on freedom of speech, on democracy itself. They are denying me my human right to free speech. I'm being punished and persecuted in my country of origin in the UK and in my country of residence in Austria. I come from a family that worked to establish peace around the world, a family that raised me to stand against.
You guys can see the entirety of this clip if you want. Most of the clip I played, I just wanted to get him to explain it himself. To call this outrageous is such an understatement. They are literally accusing him of being a member of Hamas. They're calling him a terrorist because of his reporting. He hasn't set a bomb anywhere. They have no video of Richard putting a bomb anywhere. They have no video of Richard doing anything that would indicate that he is working for Hamas. The only thing they have Richard doing is reporting crimes that the Israeli government, the UK government, the US government, all of these governments together have been committing and supporting in that region of the world. That's what they have him doing, journalism. And they have decided that this is a bridge too far. I think we need to put into real context how bad this is. There's a reason that the First Amendment is what it is, this notion of free speech. And the reason is because there are times that a government gets out of hand, that a government is going to say things that are not true, that a government is going to put out, let's say, stories and take points of view that is contrary to reality, or for that matter, that a government will go with narratives that is not in the best interest of the government. When you get the US government to say, well, there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and they spend $10 trillion to overthrow a government, to kill 1 million Iraqis, is that really in my best interest as an American? Is it in your best interest as an American? And is it in your best interest to point out they're lying? Not just they're lying, they're spending $10 trillion for that lie. They're torturing people. All of these things are against our laws. None of these things are in our best interest. It is my right, it is my job to point out this is wrong. There's a reason that the First Amendment is first. It is primary to be able to stand up and say things that the government is not going to like because you are contradicting the narrative that the government is putting out. Now, from the standpoint of media, well, in the old days, you only really had mainstream media. So they would go to a political figure. The political figure would give them an anonymous statement, and they would write the anonymous statement down. That was your news. That was your media. That was the point of view that you got. It was very specific. The bandwidth of it was very narrow. And so, yeah, you may be talking about a Fox News, or you may be talking about a CNN, but for all intents and purposes, these things are not diverging that far away from one another. The story that they're given is going to be very specific. And very rarely would it contradict the main narrative that the US government or whatever particular government is putting out. With social media, that is no longer true. And with social media, you have reporters who are looking into all sorts of crevices and corners, trying to figure out what's more likely to be true. And does this align, A, with my values? And does it align with the values of the country? And more importantly, does it line up with the narrative that the government is effectively putting out? It is my job. I take that job seriously. I would imagine that Richard takes that job seriously. So it is pretty outrageous when he has to make a video saying, I am not Hamas. That's astonishing. And it's even more astonishing when you need to stand in court and point out, just because I am reporting on this issue doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a member of this group. Meaning me reporting on the Democratic Party does not mean I'm a Democrat, or me reporting on the Republican Party doesn't mean I'm a Republican. I hope you understand my point. Him reporting on the issue does not, by definition, means that he is somehow affiliated with the group that he is reporting on. It is outrageous. It is outrageous. If you are not allowed to critique your government, if you are not allowed to point out that the narrative that the government is running is a lie, that it's wrong, that it's deceptive, that is cynically deceptive in order to get a certain point of view and get the public to take a point of view, then what does it mean for this notion of media? What does it mean for this notion of free speech? Or for that matter, what does it mean for these liberal values that says that media is associated with this notion of democracy and is associated with this notion of freedom? If you don't have the ability to critique your government, then what do you have? I'm pointing out that Richard critiquing his government, or Richard pointing out how bad things are on the ground as a direct result of the money that the US, or for that matter, the UK, has been dumping into the Middle East. It's not wrong. He's doing what he's supposed to do. The issue here is that the government just doesn't like what he's saying. And they've decided the way to go about it in order to get him, and the way to go about it to mess with his reporting, to destroy his ability to report, is to effectively say he is a terrorist. He's Hamas. He's working with Hamas. And so now that we've come up with this fig leaf, this patina of reality that in no way is reality, we can now ignore any rights that he might have had. We can ignore any notion of having to respect him as a human being. We can just say he's a terrorist. And now that we defined him as a terrorist, anything that we do is fair game. So yeah, we have a warrant. But yeah, we're going to take everything in the room because what are you going to do about it? You're a terrorist. And yeah, we're going to take your book. We're going to take your recording devices. Oh, is this your, oh, was that your cell phone? I'm so sorry that I dropped your cell phone. Oh, and by the way, we need your passwords. And if you don't give us your passwords, we're going to put 2 years on top of whatever trumped up charges we're trying to come up with. That's what we're going to do. That is astonishing. Even for Europe, that is astonishing. That is astonishing. So Richard is in the position where they are threatening him with jail time. They are threatening him with 14 years in a cage. 14 years in a cage if he doesn't pony up with passwords for journalistic sources that he may have in those phones and in those communication devices. That is what they're doing in Europe. So this idea of going after your government, of pointing out that the government is lying. And again, when I'm saying pointing out that the government is lying, that's not trivial. You're pointing out something that may not be to the benefit of the population itself, meaning the government may be running with a narrative that is contrary to what is in the best interest of the public. Governments have often done that. Apparently in Europe, saying that is a problem, especially when it's related to what's happening in Gaza and what is happening in the Middle East. That is mind-blowing. Any way you look at that, it's mind-blowing. Like the idea that they've come to the conclusion that the man is Hamas, and so we're going to treat him like a terrorist is astonishing. Outright, completely astonishing. And yet, that is the position that they have effectively put him in. Richard is apparently in Vienna right now. The first arrest took place in London or in the UK. This arrest took place in Vienna. And apparently they kept him for a period of time. They had him in for an interrogation. They threatened him. And as he pointed out, he just said, I have no comment. There's nothing I need to say to you. There's nothing I want to say to you that didn't necessarily stop them from detaining him and holding him. I couldn't imagine that. Like you were literally sitting in a police station and they're talking to you and saying, we believe that you're working with Hamas. And on top of believing that you're working with Hamas, we now have the right because we have defined it this way, meaning there's nothing to show for this. There's no reality to this. But because we've defined it this way, we can now do whatever we want. That's amazing. That's amazing. I was pointing out to someone that the reason we have a First Amendment in the United States is because governments do stuff like that. Like, if there was no First Amendment, they would do the same thing here. And I'm saying this because I had a radio job. And in having my radio job, the federal government under Joe Biden, Blinken, decided we need to get them off air. We don't like the fact that Sputnik or RT is reporting in the United States. So we need to get them off air. We need to stop them from giving their narrative of events. And I hate to tell you this, my narrative just so happened was true. Meaning I was more right over the course of time I worked at the radio station than anybody you were seeing in mainstream media. And yet my podunk little station that we worked on, even that was too loud for them. And so you got Blinken coming out saying, and he said this openly, we believe that part of the reason that Africa and many of the other countries around the world has not lumped on to the United States overthrow of Ukraine and attempted undercutting of the Russia was because of RT and Sputnik. And so we need to get rid of this as an entity in the United States and abroad and to go after governments where it's allowed in the country. And so my own government decided that my voice and the people on the channel's voice was too loud, despite the fact that we were somewhat of a small station. I'm pointing out that in the same way they did that to us, and they did that to us using an end run around the First Amendment, there is no First Amendment in Europe. And if our little station, who, was here in DC, Maryland, etc., if that little station was that problematic and bothersome to the United States narrative of events around the globe, whether it was in the UK, whether it was in Ukraine, whether it was in Europe in regards to those elections that were taking place, or for that matter, what was in the Middle East. If our station was too loud, Richard's reach is further than mine. It was further than our station. And there is no protection for Richard in regards to an amendment that prevents them from doing what they are doing. This is outrageous. This is outrageous. This is what they're doing in Europe to people and voices that they don't necessarily like. If you remember, they arrested that journalist who covered the Donbass elections also. It was a European journalist. The journalist went to cover the elections that were taking place in Donbass after those various regions were liberated. And when that person, I can't remember the person's name, when they got back into their country, they were arrested for doing journalism. Richard is being prosecuted for doing journalism. It's astonishing. It's hard for me to wrap my head around it. It's like, I understand why they're doing it. It's that they're doing it and that they're going to this extent to do it. You are Hamas. Can you imagine that? You're sitting in a room and somebody is looking at you with a straight face and they're saying, we believe you're Hamas and we believe you're working with Hamas. And so we are going to treat you as if you are Hamas, which means that any rights that you might have had are now out the window. You're fair game. What does that do to your reporting? What does it do to your reporting? Do you keep reporting? What do you do? What do you do in that situation? Do you keep doing the job that you were doing? And I'm going to assume that Richard is a good faith actor, which means that these are issues that he cares about. This is the area of the world and of life that he found to be of supreme importance, which is the reason why he's covering the stories in the first place. How do you keep reporting when they are looking at you saying, if you do so, you will be prosecuted? And not just maybe, we are actively going after you now. I will tell you this, if media goes and the ability to contradict your government goes, what does it mean for the government? Keep in mind, media is almost like an audit for the government. It's this kind of fifth column stuff. It's this, what do they call it? Fifth estate or fourth estate that is overseeing what government is doing and is supposed to provide oversight for that government. I'm saying this to say he is doing his job. They just don't like the job he's doing. And so they've decided we need to put a knife in him. We need to shut him up. And the way that we can shut him up, considering, A, he's not in his own country, is by putting him in a cage. Somebody in the chat pointed out that this was the same thing they did to Julian Assange. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Assange was given reports that were inconvenient to various people, well, for one, in the US government, but in governments in general. And they needed a way, we need to stop him from getting these leaks out to the public for them to see how their governments actually function. Oh, I know. Let's put him in a cage. And so you got the situation where they had Julian Assange in a cage in an embassy. Well, I called it a cage because he was stuck in the embassy for like 7 to 8 years. And then after he gets dragged out of the embassy, gets thrown into an actual cage that he was in for several years after that. I would imagine Richard is freaked out, as he should be. And the notion that he has to make a video saying, I'm not Hamas, is outrageous. Just out. This video is astonishing. This video is astonishing. My heart goes out to him. My heart goes out to him. I hope he is okay. I hope he is well. I hope he is safe. I hope there is no situation where they can get their hands on him. I understand that he's in a situation where he is in Vienna, and at this point, they've taken apparently his devices and everything else. I don't know how he did this video. He probably had a cell phone somewhere, or at the very least knows someone with one where he can do this. Either way, this is not a good situation. And if they can do this to him, then other journalists in Europe clearly are also fair game. It's almost like you need to do one in order to kind of set the principle that it can be done. They're calling him Hamas. calling him Hamas. And by the way, we're not excluded from this in the United States. For all the talk of free speech and that, Twitter is going to be a free speech platform and Donald Trump believes in free speech and Republicans believe in free speech. Let's see how that works in the context of people who are criticizing Israel or criticizing Donald Trump's policy of ethnic cleansing Gaza and the West Bank. And for people when they raise their voices about that, let's see how Donald Trump and those free speech believing Republicans deal with that situation, because that situation will happen when you're going to see these students protest. You're going to see people losing their minds when Trump pushes Egypt, or for that matter, pushes Jordan to ethnically cleanse Gaza and the West Bank. Just astonishing. But I want to bring my man in. We are joined. There we are. We're joined with Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense. He's an author and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. My man, how you doing, Michael? You doing okay today?
I'm great, Jamal. Thank you for having me.
Let's see this. No, man, always glad to have you. I saw this tweet by Musk, and like I said, I have mixed feelings about the tweet. In one sense, I think Musk is right. In the other sense, Musk is not the person who would prefer to be doing anything in looking into defense. But let's just get into the story. So Musk put out this tweet saying American weapons programs need to be completely redone. The current strategy is to build a small number of weapons at a high price to fight yesterday's war. Unless there are immediate dramatic changes, America will lose the next war very badly. And I said to myself, I'm like, he's probably right. Now, it's not so much that he's probably right. The issue is Elon Musk really the person to be making these, let's say, recommendations in relation to security issues in the United States? But taking that part out for the moment, he's right. I played the audience this clip because I find this clip to be amazing and indicative of what Musk is talking about. So this is, I don't know who this Congress member is, but who he is kind of irrelevant to the point. Listen to what he says. I don't want to get your take on what he is saying in this clip.
This is a $90,000 bag of bushings that you need for any jet turbine engine just to operate. So the exorbitant
I'm not hearing the clip.
DoD only buying commercial parts from the OEMs, which is essentially sold.
Oh, you don't hear this?
No.
Okay. So he is showing a bag of, I guess, nuts and bolts. And he is effectively saying that this bag cost, I think he said $90,000, when really, in real terms, if you bought this, it would be, $1,000 at most in any kind of random person that bought it. And his point is, we're spending all of this money and we don't know what we're effectively spending this money on. I guess for me, this leads into what Musk is saying, like, we're fighting yesterday's war, and not just fighting yesterday's war. We have no idea what we are spending this money on in regards to waste, fraud, and abuse. Give me your take on this. Is Musk right on this?
Well, there's two elements here. One is the ungodly expense for a similar item that you can buy over the counter. But oftentimes these items, dependent upon what they are, have to be specially designed, and they are of limited quantity. So, and they have to be of a certain quality. And that's why that drives up the price, like the bathrooms in a particular type of airplane, for example. The proverbial toilet seat that we used to hear about all the time. And however, I think there's something else going on here, and that is we're basically funding items for our previous wars. We're not looking to the future as to what those items should be, and given the cost, they are much more. They're going to be much more expensive due to every conceivable reason, and our, like the F-35, we've spent over $1 trillion on that program, and it only flies half the time.
Yep.
And only 50% are operational at any given time. And frankly, I'm told the technology at a certain speed begins to warp and peel, and that's not good in a combat situation. And the F-35 has never really been subjected to extended combat, except for brief flyovers to bomb an item and then they disappear. But if they had to engage and at a consistent high speed for an extended period of time, they would not make it. And that's why you have the breakdowns, and the costs for replacement components are astronomical. Plus, we've also been downsizing our military. We haven't really built it up according to what Trump has in mind, like a peace through strength. We are expending whatever we've had, and it's been so expensive for so long. And again, we're buying things for yesterday's wars, and we need to be projecting in the future as to what those are going to be. And that's really out of the realm of Musk's expertise. I don't know. He did come up with SpaceX, and he does things like that, but he can always hire the experts. And we're not seeing those. We're not seeing the private sector ideas and technologies being incorporated in a timely fashion into our own defense structure. There have been efforts in the past to link those two, but so far it really hasn't worked out all that much. I know DARPA is involved, but DARPA is one of these deep R&D centers for the Defense Department that you never see the production of it. And the costs are horrendous. They are looking in the future, but there needs to be more of a synergy between the private sector technology base with the Defense Department, and it's difficult to get that integration going to project into the future, because we're always again dealing with yesterday's wars and hardware, and that needs to change.
But there's something else associated with this too, though, right? I mean, we spend nearly $1 trillion a year. We can't get an audit in real terms. And if you are, let's say, a company, what you care about is your bottom line, right? I want to maximize my profit. I want to make as much money as possible. And if the federal government is going to give me $90,000 for a bag of nuts and bolts, then I'm going to take the $90,000 that the federal government is going to give me for the nuts and bolts. Meaning we're ignoring this kind of capitalistic incentive of maximizing profit at the expense of, let's say, defense issues. And so we have no idea how much of that money gives us, let's say, a return on the investment for that money. We use the $1 trillion almost as if a military show. It would be like you have certain countries that will show their military hardware. Us showing the $1 trillion that we spend is effectively us showing off military hardware without showing off military hardware. I guess for Americans, though, we don't necessarily know that we're getting a return on the investment for the money that we're investing. I guess that's my issue with this. That's why I'm saying Musk has a point. But it's like, is Musk the guy to do it or to deliver it? How would we change that? Like, how would we get some level of clarity and transparency on the money that is being spent and whether or not it's worth the return on investment that we're getting for the money that's being spent?
You're right in the sense that the Defense Department has failed, 7 or 8 audits so far. That's probably going to change, and now Donald Trump wants his group to go in there and really find out where the waste, fraud, and abuse might be, and that really involves cost overruns. The problem, like taking it again, the example of the F-35, over time it took so long to develop because new requirements, technology requirements, were always placed on it, that the price per unit went astronomically, and even then, every time you add a new technology, that's just one more thing that's going to go bad, and that requires parts, components, and fine tuning. And technology is sensitive, so it's a very difficult thing to try and project like that a weapons system and actually make it work. And we're not seeing that happen in any efficient manner. And so consequently, I'd like to see someone, maybe he can get a group of whiz kids together that can try and project, because he does have a background with SpaceX. Yeah. Maybe that's what we need to do. We need to have a brain trust that can project weapons programs for each service and what's going to be required. Something that's gee whiz, and they can be working on the development of that and not involved a lot of cost overruns. But part of the cost overruns are just the way they do the procurement process. Every state and every district, congressional district in the United States has some component of some defense contract in order to ensure that these programs get funded. And these may be programs that are obsolete, like the A-10. They've been trying to ditch the A-10 because other aircraft and other technologies have superseded its usefulness, although during its time, during the Iraqi war, it was very effective in knocking out tanks. Well, you're not going to always be knocking out tanks. You're going to be hitting things from afar. And that type of aircraft, given its slowness, is not going to be what works. So that's basically obsolete, but yet the Air Force and some congressional members where the A-10 components are manufactured insist upon maintaining those production lines. So how do you get a handle on something like that? And it's going to take some brain trust to come up with a solution to deal with that reality. And so far, given the budgets, given the timeliness that and requirements, given the projections, given the threats, you got all these elements bombarding decision-making, the decision-making process. And how do you pull it all together to come up with a solution?
So you're saying part of the problem is that each congressional district has, let's say, elements of the military built into it, and that each congressional district is not necessarily want to give up something that is being built in their district because it's to their best interest, right? Like if this company goes out of business because we no longer need this particular product in the military, okay, but those people who lose jobs, and the fact that they lose those jobs may have a political impact on a Congress member that allowed that, let's say, device, that element, even if that element wasn't necessarily used or wanted by the U.S. military, to stop production.
Well, that's precisely what I'm saying. And you take the F-35 once again, I think components for it come from like over 40 U.S. states. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Oh, wow. And none of those states or none of those districts are going to want that stuff to go anywhere.
That's correct.
In which case, we
correct.
Continue with boondoggles that don't necessarily
that's why you continue to get a funding on an aircraft that already the Air Force has come up with designs for a 6th generation. Now, what's that going to incorporate? Here again, you got to have someone who can project what warfare will be like in the future. You see the F-35 as an example was all supposed to be all stealth. Now there's some talk whether the 6th generation even needs to be all stealth, since we now have long-range missiles that can be used in attacks, and so you can shoot from miles and miles and miles away if you can positively identify the aircraft. But that incorporates the need for the technology to positively identify the targets. So it depends upon what the reliance on other weapon systems, which are made in other areas of the country. So how do you pull together the means, the brains to coordinate all of these decisions? The tanks, are they obsolete? They're getting knocked out like crazy, especially if you have air power. Now, in the case of Ukraine, they're not, because Ukrainians don't have effective air power. But however, the coming on of the drones is another matter. Drones are offering a whole new level of warfare that we still have not realized the full potential of. And and we're already seeing aircraft being built for aircraft carriers that are all that have no pilots, and they basically fly as an escort and can bomb and do all those things, and they're all remote, but someone has to guide them. So that seems to be, so you have a standoff ability to shoot at a target. There has to be a human of some kind, but that requires a technology level that is unbelievable. Then we have a technology that we're still trying to work. You'll recall when we threatened the then Soviet Union with SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, in which weapons would be used, be put into outer space and used and activated to take out ballistic missiles. Well, at that time, it was all a bluff. It was all a bluff, but the Soviets at the time did not know that that was a bluff. Even to this day, we have not yet fully identified that level of technology if we're going to be going in that direction. So you may see warfare in space in the future, and that seems to be why the Space Force was developed. So, but who undertakes and manages the programs to build the technology base and to go in that direction? And is that going to be the warfare of the future? These are very strategic questions that you need a brain trust to project these kinds of things and be able to figure out what will be necessary to fight a war in the future. When I was at the Defense Department, it used to be we have to be able to fight a two-front war at the same time. Today, we can't even fight one unless you're going to go nuclear. That's a different matter. But conventionally, it's not possible. And certainly all the countries of NATO combined cannot equal what the Russians have acquired and now have at their disposal today, including especially in ground warfare. And if we were to mobilize to prepare for NATO to fight Russia, it would take weeks and weeks and weeks. By then, Russians will have already pulverized every European city with hypersonics. It's not like we did in Iraq in 2000 in 1999 when it took us 6 months to mobilize to go to the desert. 6 months. Can't do that anymore if you're going to be operating. So those are warfares of the past, but we're still fighting those types of warfares. That's what my point is. Yeah. We need a brain trust that can project what's going to go on in the future. And the Defense Department has not done that. So if you're going to look at national security policy versus foreign policy, where you look at geostrategic, geopolitical relations on the one hand, but how do you defend your interests in the future? That's why you're beginning to see Trump, and I think this is intriguing, but no one's talked about it. In my mind, Trump is basically acknowledging today that we are indeed evolving into a multipolar world order. That's why you see him looking more closer to home rather than developing those spheres of influence that pertain to the United States security, rather than having us go traipse all over the world for questionable issues of what's in our strategic interest. It's what can we defend for ourselves, our own homeland, when we feel threatened? Where's the threat? That's why Ukraine never really emerged as a threat to us. But when you want to push an ideology like the neocons have done, then you want your military everywhere. That's why we have 800 bases. I project that in the coming months and maybe years under Trump, we're going to see a drawdown of a lot of the U.S. bases that are sprawled all over Europe and even into Asia. There's over 800 bases right now. Do we need them all? That's the kind of stuff that really needs to be analyzed. And to do that, you need to evaluate your strategic interests. And how do you, I mean, this requires a multi-layer analysis from experts that can get together in one room and come up with a solution. And then from that solution, you figure out the direction you're going to be heading, but what are going to be the requirements for that, and what's going to be the lead time to develop the technologies and the weapon systems to back those up. You see, when we export a technology, it's one that we have a counter ability to deal with it in case it gets into the wrong hands. We've lost that. Now you have other countries, particularly China, Russia, that have these hypersonics, and we don't even have a defense for it. We don't even have our own hypersonics, let alone a defense against hypersonics.
Yeah,
that is maneuverable. They not only have hypersonics, they have hypersonics that are maneuverable. And hypersonics is, by definition, anything that's Mach 5 or and above, 5 times the speed of sound. And now they got them so that they can maneuver them, which is unlike a ballistic missile. With a ballistic missile, you can see the trajectory and program where it's going to hit. But with a hypersonic missile, you can move it. You see, we don't have the technology to do that right now.
It's fair to say that drones have fundamentally changed warfare.
Yeah, and it's going to get more sophisticated in the years to come, and that's why I cannot project what it means or where it's going to be heading. But yeah, these are things that we need people with the expertise and knowledge to project these things and be able to get a group of experts. No one person possesses all that knowledge, but you can certainly have leaders who can see, who can have the insight to say, I need to project into this. I need to find the best experts I can to figure this out, and what technologies that I will need and invest in terms of budgeting purposes. And here we go. You get that back to the fundamentals. And where do you start?
Do you foresee him cutting the military bases? I mean, do you think that would be hard to do in this climate? I mean, because from Trump's point of view, he's like, okay, this is a waste. And I agree with you. He seems to be accepting the kind of spheres of influence. Even Rubio gave a speech recently where he pointed out that we're in a multipolar world, that this notion of having a unipolar power was a fleeting thing, that wasn't something that was expected to last for a long period of time, and that for all intents and purposes, we are in a new world, we're in a new environment. I suspect that's why he keeps going after Canada, saying Canada can't support itself on its own, and trying to create this kind of supercontinent with Canada and the United States, or for that matter, the Arctic, all of those things being under the United States auspices. I guess that's what I'm looking at, right? Like, it seems that, do you see him closing those military bases? Do you think he'd be able to do it, given this kind of the way that the U.S. media, or the way that many of the political leaders kind of own those bases? Like, I don't get the sense that that's going to be something that they're going to want to give up. But give me your thoughts on it.
Well, he tends to be in a slash and burn mentality right now, and direction. I think you're going to see a dramatic change in the months and years to come in the composition of NATO and the support for NATO. And in fact, there's some question in my mind whether it will even survive, because I think they're going to break up ultimately into regional defense alliances. And the United States, and we have to look, we're $36 trillion in debt. And his point and Trump's point is, unless we get a handle on this now, our country isn't going to last another generation as a nation, because we won't be able. And this is basically also how other empires rose and then fell, and we're on that trajectory right now, and that's why getting a grip on the debt is so imperative at this juncture, because how do you recover from that? And what's incredible is that just the mere examination of where we can begin to cut and slash in these various programs, all you have are the Democrats coming up yelling and screaming about their sacred cows being attacked, and nobody, I mean, among the Democrats is saying, you know, we really need to protect. We really need to look and cut the budget, and here's how we can work to streamline the process. You're not hearing any of that. All they can do is complain. They've had all of this time to deal with it, and they didn't. So now we have an alternative, and all they can do is bitch. And never once are they coming up with any viable alternatives on how to save the country.
You're so right. This is Ursula von der Leyen. She is saying that Europe, women.
It is time, and even high time,
I don't
to
hear
take
anybody.
our
You still don't hear?
security and defense
No.
into our
And
own
by the way, I
hands.
don't see my picture up on the screen. I don't hear you.
One second. Okay, so she's saying it is high time. And by the way, you're there. I promise you, you're there. The audience can see
Okay.
you and everything else. I'm not sure what's going on with the volume of the sound, but I promise you, you're there. She
Okay.
is saying that Europe, it's time that Europe takes its own security into its own hands. Now, this is
Okay.
coming after Trump effectively pulling out of U.S. aid. And on top of pulling out of U.S. aid, it seems to be very clear that he is positioning Europe that he wants to get out of this war. In fact, you have Mike Waltz, who is apparently going over to Europe. And Waltz, I'm not going to play the video because you can't hear it, but Waltz is effectively saying, A, he wants Ukraine to give up materials for continued security from the United States.
Raw materials, yeah.
Yeah. And B, on top of that, he wants to hand Ukraine off to Europe, effectively saying, look, this is your problem. This is not America's problem. If this war continues, you will have to manage and maintain that war. What does that mean for Europe? Is Europe even able to do that? Like, meaning, is Europe able to carry the burden in the way that the United States was carrying the burden in order to maintain and continue the war? I mean, that's astonishing. And for von der Leyen to come out and say, we need to start taking our security into our own hands. Is that something the United States really even wants? The entire point of NATO, from my point of view, was a power projection device that the US could use in Europe. What does it mean if Europe decides we need to cover our own security?
Well, I think that they cannot, and you know, we had to pull their chestnuts out of the fire twice: World War I and World War II, and then after World War II, we created NATO. The whole idea being to try to stop a future war. Then we had the Bosnia War, and the United States didn't get into it. And all the NATO countries were wringing their hands trying to figure out how to deal with the Bosnian crisis. And then Clinton reluctantly got into it and started bombing the Serbs. And, you know, then all of a sudden it became a US war. What happened to those other NATO countries who were supposed to be involved? And then it becomes our problem. And that's basically what happened. And I think that we've got to get away from that. If these countries want to fight centuries-old disputes, don't involve us. That's why, you know, you go back to 1776. We were warned against foreign entanglements, and that is a truism even to this day.
Yep.
Yeah, and we see the problems that are occurring. That's why you had like Victoria Nuland, who was originally from Tsarist Russia, which today is Ukraine. She was leading the charge to go into Ukraine. I mean, are we fighting? And she what did she want her family farm back? Is that why? And she's using U.S. auspices to do that. I mean, what's the point? What was the national security threat? We didn't see any evidence. If we saw evidence, and that's the key, evidence of Russia wanting to move into Europe and things like that, that would have been different. But we haven't seen that. They haven't even gone to the Dnieper River, although that may be ultimately where they wind up. Because Putin doesn't want Western Ukraine. And what you have in the wings are countries such as Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and all these countries that are now NATO members, using NATO as a basis to chip away and get back those portions of West Ukraine that they used to have in their own empires back in the 17th, 18th century. Come on, you know? I mean, how long is this going on? Poland definitely wants Galicia back, and it has Polish-speaking people there, just like Eastern Ukraine had Russian-speaking.
Right.
And that's why you're seeing basically Ukraine now being beginning to unravel as a cohesive entity. And it's going to go on in the months and years to come. And if we pull out, I think we need to, from a strategic standpoint, we just need to let the Europeans stew in their own juices. If that's what they want to do. And if they want to go ahead and create their own defense force, that talk has been going on for years.
Yep.
And you've had Macron and the French saying, well, we want to be in charge of it. Well, go ahead, be our guest. Just don't involve us in it, you know, because as it is, we're paying their bills.
Well, that's the rub. And that's the argument that Trump makes, right? It's like, why are we doing this? Why are we involved in this particular conflict? This is
And that's never been answered. And the people who defend it the most, particularly the Democrats and all those who want to maintain the status quo, cannot defend it.
So what do you think is going to happen in Europe with this? I mean, for one, do you think they're serious about this kind of new defense force, whatever the hell von der Leyen is talking about, especially with this notion? And the reason why I ask this is because, as you pointed out, it seems that this idea that we're in a multipolar world is becoming normalized. It's becoming understood. And if Europe sees what Trump is doing, and he sees that, okay, this kind of wing of the Republican Party has decided we're in a multipolar world and America is going to go its own way to protect its own interests, which Canada, Greenland, Panama Canal, meaning this is why Trump is focusing on these items in its regards to this kind of super continent that he kind of wants to create for America's own security and America's own interests. If Europe sees that, and they see that Donald Trump is this kind of new face of the Republican Party going forward, what are they to do with that? I guess that's my point, right? They've said this more than once. Macron has come out and said we need our own European security. But is this the moment where they've come to this realization that America, even after Trump, will most likely still have some elements of Trumpism that are in it? And that element of Trumpism may be America's looking out for America's interests. We're not getting into these foreign entanglements in Europe, in which case, from a European point of view, that they do on some level, whatever that is, need to come up with some kind of European defense force separate from NATO. Or is this still?
Well, I think it's coming to that, and I think it's evolving toward that. And if Van der Linden is even voicing it openly, then that's an acknowledgement that even the EU believes that may be the way to go. And then let them fight over who's going to be in charge. The United States, it's not the U.S. problem. If they want to go at it and pick fights with Russia, they're on their own. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what's been going on. And there's no reason to pick a fight with Russia.
No,
Russia has the fact that it is involved now in the creation of a multipolar world suggests something interesting. And that is that the countries that want to belong to this multipolar world do not want to see any one country take over others like Germany did in World War II. And I think that's been a restraining factor that they don't, particularly the global South countries that are into it, the multipolar world order for economic development purposes, not to give countries such as Russia or China a green card, a go card to conquer other lands. No, that's not what they want. They want there's a recognition of the sovereignty of countries and the UN, but they need reform in order to bring in the wishes of these developing countries. And there has never been, with the rise of the multipolar world order, there's never been it's always been declared to be not anti-Western, but more inclusive, but to be more inclusive with a recognition that they are essential, but reform them. And that's coming out of Russia, out of China. And you see it all the time now, and everything needs to be based upon on international law. And that's what they're sticking with. And so the notion of the type of warfare that we've been planning using a NATO, creating a NATO, is based upon yesterday's wars and day before yesterday's wars, because they're given how fast a war could go if you started using hypersonics. They wouldn't last very long, and they'd be totally destructive. And that's the problem. So how do you project? You need a brain trust that can come and spend days and weeks pondering this as to the direction, and come up with an analysis that lays out the path for the future. And I'm not seeing that happen. Yeah, we do war games, but that's based upon the current realities and old technologies, not on futures and what's needed. We need a brain trust within the Pentagon. And I don't think Hegseth is capable of that. That's why he needs to get the people with the brains to come up with that and give it that kind of analysis. And based upon that, you start planning your budgets and what technologies are going to be required and where you need to go with it in the future. So we need to project. And you see this with Putin. I mean, he's always six moves ahead, or at least 3 moves ahead on the chessboard. And yet, given the fact that I think hegemony, U.S. hegemony, is now obsolete, I think it's a recognition now by Trump, especially, in the belief of the creation and reality of a multipolar world order, and we need to accommodate and adjust our own strategic interests and values accordingly. And I think that's the direction we're going to go.
And I guess the last question is, do you see that happening? This kind of adjustment of our own values, our own ideas as we move forward, if indeed the objective is to get some kind of settlement and let's say resolution to many of the world's issues in regards to this kind of thing of war.
We're going to have to, if we want to continue surviving as a nation, and to be involved in progress and bringing on greater stability in the world. It's absolutely essential, because we cannot be the antagonist in the world. Right now, we're really isolated. That's why you've seen the creation of a multipolar world order in response to Western hegemony, especially U.S. The rules, we're supposed to be in charge of the rules-based order. Well, we make the rules. If we make the rules, we can break the rules, and that's basically what we've been showing, especially during the Biden administration. Well, those days are over. These other countries are saying, wait a minute, we're not going to put up with that crap. We're moving on to something else. We're going to do something else. We'll create our own financial system and be able to get along quite well. For example, you have just today, it came out, Trump wants to put 25% tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum. Well, let me tell you something. They have come up, the fact that they are able to, the Chinese especially, have come up with ways to counter that. Agricultural goods. Well, if you don't want to buy, if you're going to put tariffs on U.S. exports of agriculture, the Chinese will just go to Brazil. The other countries now, and that they're all part of BRICS. Yeah. And they're all working together in harmony, and that's the beauty. And that's the beauty of that arrangement, as in terms of the creation of that multipolar world order. So I'm seeing this shift, and I think Donald Trump probably sees it in a macro way. But how do you pull together and change the direction of an entire country and orient that country to address these realities that are emerging in the future, and we need to be able to project those and be able to lay a foundation to deal with them rather than having them come up and kick us in the ass. You know, we've got to be ready. We've got to be able to project, and we need the brain power at the leadership level to project these kinds of things in the future, whether it's defense, economics, and that's part of working together with other nations rather than always claiming that we are the exception. Not necessarily. We're not.
Michael Maloof, he is a former policy analyst and Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, my man, always appreciate talking to you. I really do.
Thanks for having me, Jamal.
You have a good one. Be safe. All right. We have come to the end of this episode. I want to hit members before I leave. President Jafar, I stand with mailman. I stand with mailmen too, but I don't think you meant mail as M-A-I-L. Fair enough. I shared with, I think this is Maternimal member, 2 months. Thank you for that. Oh, that was President Jafar. I'm sorry. Shout out to you, man. Thank you. Mr. Riffley, when did Trump start issuing executive orders about conscription in the United States? I feel like that may be coming. He could use social media to target Kamala Harris voters and first time around draftees. I am super skeptical that he is going to push through conscription. I am radically skeptical that Trump is going to do that. You could be right, Mr. Riffley. I'm just skeptical. Jane Anderson, there we are. Musk is using legit waste, fraud, and abuse to manufacture consent for his targeting workers at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the National Relations Labor Board. Yes, it's that. It's that. She's absolutely right. Because, again, you can have two things at once. You can have a situation where, okay, these guys spend $1 trillion a year on the military. Obviously, there's going to be some waste, fraud, and abuse into that process. And so you're looking into it. It's not shocking. It's something that the overwhelming majority of Americans may even be okay with. They're looking into waste, fraud, and abuse. But the catch becomes, is that really what they're looking for? And if they're destroying these elements of the government that worked in the benefit of Americans, then what? Yeah, Janice, I agree with you. All of this stuff is done under the cover of, well, we're just looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. And for the amount of money that the government spends each year, you know it's going to be there. It's not that. Most people would be okay with that. It's everything else, if that makes sense. Resurrect Mints, or Ms. Resurrect Mints. It's being said that the Treasury is being put on blockchain by Twitter. I believe it when I see it. I believe it when I see it. I don't buy it. I'll believe it when I see it. Megan Brooks, welcome to the family, Megan. And for that matter, welcome to the family. President Jafar, you are deeply appreciated, both of you, for joining. Thank you. Look, I'm going to call it a day because I need to slice these videos up. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. You guys are always appreciated. Most of the show is booked for this week, and so you guys are going to have a damn good show every day coming up this week. I'm going to close it. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. And I'm going to end it here. Have a good one, all. Be safe, especially with the winter weather supposedly coming. Yeah, I don't know where you are, so I can't say that. For anybody on the north, or let's say towards Richmond, Richmond's not really north, it's considered the south. But still, if you're in the southern part of the United States, please be safe. We're expecting a winter warning. It's going to hit here, and apparently it's going to hit, I would imagine, in DC, Maryland, etc. So I will end this here. You guys have a fantastic evening. Hit like on the video, share the content. If you do dig the content and you find yourself coming back here often, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All of those things are appreciated. All of them help the show, considering that most of these shows are demonetized. So I'm going to end it here. You all have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 92. Signing off.